Hello and welcome to fSobriety. I am Craig Woods and my shadow is always with me. Sometimes in front, sometimes behind, sometimes to the right of me, sometimes to the left. Except on cloudy days. And at night.
And my name is James Hamilton and I'm going to go and have a word with my pine cone.
And once again we are joined by our special guest. 2 consecutive episodes in a row. This is an occasion. Mr. Alan Todd, all the way from the Big Glasgow comic page. How are you, sir?
Hello! Well, as you know, my dharma is the road, and your dharma is...
Well, thank you, Alan. And may the road rise to eat your wheels. Wheat your wheels? Yes. I'm not changing that.
It's a nice turn of phrase.
How are we, chaps? Are we all good?
Pretty good. I was reminded today that Michael Cera's performance in Twin Peaks: The Return is one of the greatest performances of the 21st century.
It is one of the most ingenious
Indeed.
casting choices of contemporary television in recent memory, certainly. I was reminded of the same thing when I rewatched parts 3 and 4 today. So, yes, on that subject, that is what we are here to talk about today. We are continuing with our Twin Peaks: The Return rewatch.
Whoa. Twin Peaks: The Return? I was watching Sesame Street.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
That's alright, I'm sure it'll work.
Sesame Street: The Return.
Yeah, the David Lynch episodes, it was pretty cool.
Twin Peaks. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be diving into. We are going to be discussing parts 3 and 4 of Twin Peaks: The Return in the context of The Return as a whole. That means it will be a spoiler-filled discussion, so the usual warning, if you have not seen Twin Peaks: The Return in its entirety, this is not the podcast for you. Godspeed, go ahead, watch Twin Peaks: The Return and enjoy, and then come back. But before we get into that, as is our wont on this podcast in which we discuss all things contemporary culture, I have to throw the question at you guys. Has there been anything going on in the contemporary culture landscape that has caught your eyes, ears, and general delectation? But before you answer that, I'm just going to hand over briefly to the Hamiltron, a resident AI, who is going to direct you listeners who do not wish to listen to this additional bit of unrelated non-Twin Peaks jet to the point in the podcast where you can catch up on all things cherry pie, coffee, and donut disturb.
Also, we'd appreciate if she kept her snide comments to herself this episode and didn't constantly interrupt with quote-unquote corrections.
Well, if you get your fucking facts straight, then I won't have to AI explain to you how podcasts work, will I? Okay, dear listener, if you want to skip straight to the Twin Peaks: The Return chat, we'll see you again at the 25-minute mark. Meanwhile, back to you dummies.
Thank you, Hamilton. Always a treat. So, guys, once we get on with you, what music have you enjoyed? What TV you enjoyed? Has there been anything that you want to alert us all to? Tell us that you've enjoyed.
I have listened to no new music in the last month.
Well, that's all right. This is keeping this segment nice and brief. To be fair, it's been a while since our last episode, James.
Depends. If you mean between this episode and the last one, it's probably been a couple of weeks. If you mean between episodes 19 and 18, it's been a while.
That is what I meant, yeah.
As at the time of recording, I'm still editing episode 19 because, as it turns out, when the government decides that a pandemic is over, suddenly you're really busy again. So
Yep.
there's that. That happens. I've been watching stuff though. I've seen some things. I've seen.
I don't think I'm going to believe this.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Been watching Marvel / Disney's Loki.
How is it?
Been enjoying it. It's very expensive looking.
Interesting that you've watched it and our guy here from supposedly Big Glasgow Comic Page hasn't.
Yeah, comic guy.
Worst host ever.
So,
Indeed.
so Loki is the brother of the character Thor. No, no, it's a good laugh. Like as Craig knows, I'm in for watching all the Marvel stuff. He's not into it, but it's been fun. It's been weird. It's been fun. Owen Wilson is Owen Wilson in it.
Wow.
If you need someone to play Owen Wilson, there's no better actor.
I think you've hit the nail on the head here, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And spoilers for episode 5 of Loki, which just aired today. The best character in the show is an alligator.
That figures.
But other than that, I don't think I've watched any new stuff. I've been meaning to catch up on Mare of Easttown, but I've not watched any of it yet.
Yeah,
that's on my
good.
to-watch list.
Yeah, it's been so long since we last recorded an episode. I feel I've watched a year's worth of TV since we last spoke. But Mare of Easttown was one of the things I did watch. I did enjoy it. It was a very well-written crime drama. I was a bit freaked out. I'd not watched anything with Kate Winslet in it for a long time, and I'm upset that she's now visibly middle-aged. Still looks fantastic, but just that part of my brain is like, no, Kate Winslet should always be Kate Winslet from the fucking 90s. I know, grow up, Woodsy.
What a Titanic surprise that must have been for
Oh,
you.
this guy. What about you, Alan? Is there any telly that's caught your attention?
Nothing new, to be honest. I should have been watching Loki, as you definitely correctly pointed out, but I think I'm just going to wait until it's done and then just binge the whole lot of it. Next week at some point I'll probably just sit down and watch the heck out of Loki. I've been watching Masters of Sex.
Oh, I watched the first season of that.
I'm only on episode 2 or something, so I'm like kind of very early on in it, but love Lizzie Kaplan and Michael Sheen, so I'm thinking it'll be good.
Yeah, I will watch Lizzie Kaplan do or read or say anything, so
Yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed it.
Behind the scenes of fSobriety, Alan and I have been watching The Americans for the first time in his case. Rewatch
Yes.
for me, so that's been thoroughly enjoyable. Although, full disclosure, we did actually start watching it over a year ago, but then a thing happened in between. Can't remember what. Probably something
that's
small.
Something, yeah.
We're like well into the third season now. Did you ever watch The Americans, James?
I didn't. I've not seen it.
It's definitely a show I've recommended to you, I'm sure.
Yep, it's just behind Ringer on my to-watch list.
The running ringer joke, always fun.
I feel like we're going to put the audience through the ringer with the number of times I mentioned that.
The Americans is easily one of the best written shows of the last 10 years. And as I was remarking to Alan the other day, it was just bringing home to me watching it again just how well cast that show is. Every single actor is so superbly suited to each role. Yeah, the performances are just note perfect. So
A particularly gruesome death scene had me chalk white and sweating like a pig and actually being sick at one point as well.
yeah,
so.
that actually
Oh.
happened.
Wow. Are we talking like bone tomahawk gruesome? Like,
No. Like,
No, it's just a prolonged death scene.
Aye. It was going on and
involves a-
on, and he's like
it involves a neck
notices that I'm
injury.
getting a little bit kind of queasy or whatever.
The character
and I
takes
was
a
like,
long time to
it
die and
won't
has
go on for that much longer. I won't say a thing, and then the next thing you know, I'm like drenched in sweat and just being like, I think I'm going to be sick. So
It's a prolonged death process, and the character has an entire monologue during it.
Wow.
And, Alan was getting a bit freaked out.
it was Shakespearean. Like that's like how long this death scene took.
So anyway, I'll be honest, other than Mare of Easttown, I've not really been keeping up to date with much contemporary telly. I've been more tuned to what's going on in music, because that seems to be what I do. You know what's funny? H.E.R finally dropped her album. Wait, is this an episode of fSobrieTV?
do we have time for this?
We do if we do it really quick. Quick, cue the music! Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of fSobrieTV, the podcast within a podcast that we definitely don't have time to do, but I just had to jump in here and say that H.E.R finally dropped her first full-length album, although it's a weird thing to say because every single one of her EPs that she released prior is album length. So I don't know, we live in this age now where debut album, I don't understand what that phrase means anymore, do you?
Yes, because I'm old.
No, I know what it used to mean. It used to mean an artist's first album-length piece of work that no longer seems to mean that. Well, I just wanted to say, it's a strange thing to have to say. H.E.R's album, it's not all I wanted. It's not all I wanted. First of all...
Can I just interject here and let the listeners know that during the recording of this episode, Craig is suffering from quite bad toothache. So I'm assuming that this is the reason why he doesn't sound like himself. Carry on.
First of all, it's a bit... The album's a bit too long. It's like an hour and 20 minutes. It's like, rein it in. It's not a jazz album. It doesn't need to be that long. I can already hear jazz haters out there saying, neither do jazz albums. And to those people I say, fuck you.
Wait, is this an episode of fSobrieety?
No, we don't have time for that, James. Don't be ridiculous. We don't have time for podcast within podcast within podcast. That would be insane. There's a lot of the slow stuff, a lot of the slow, quiet, sedate kind of side of her music, and there's not nearly enough of the more upbeat, kind of soulful, funky stuff. And I love everything that she does, but I like the diversity that she brings on the earlier stuff.
Were they on the album as well?
Sure, why not?
Honestly, I can't believe that H.E.R's album is that long. You think she'd have got some of her gear out of the way with the number of appearances she's done on mediocre other artists. Stuff, you know. I'm thinking, of course, of Maroon 5.
Yeah.
That's actually about all I can think of.
I sort of maybe had a fear earlier that because she does so much, that is she going to spread herself a bit too thin? I don't know necessarily that that's what she's done. I just personally feel for my ears, there's a big slump in the middle of this album where I'm like, okay, that's been, 3, 4, 5 songs now that have all been very slow and very sedate and away from the kind of organic instrumentation. And look, I love all variations of R&B, as people who listen to this podcast will know, and as you will know, James, I love all the things that fall under the umbrella of R&B. But I like the mix, I like the diversity, you know. Like a perfect R&B album this year was Jasmine Sullivan's album that we talked about several episodes ago. It's got just that right amount of diversity, and I was sort of expecting that from her, and she didn't really deliver that. And so I'm left feeling a wee bit underwhelmed. The songs I like on it, I do really like, but yeah, there's a big fat middle section. I'm just like, it's alright. It's fine. It's fine. I mean, a better R&B album this year. In fact, a perfect R&B album. In fact, probably my number one album this year so far, which also dropped very recently, is Greentea Peng's album Man Made. Which is absolutely superb, and it has all of the stuff that I want from an R&B soul artist. You know, it has all the jazz flourishes, it has all the organic neo soul stuff, and it also has the more sedate kind of stripped back bare stuff. You will be all over that album, James, if you get it in your ears. It is so good, and I know we kind of gushed about Greentea Peng a few episodes ago when I let you hear her the first time.
Yeah, she was a big winner for me.
You'll definitely love the album. She released a whole bunch of singles last year, and only a few of them are actually on the album. And to be honest, it's also another long album. I think it's over an hour. So maybe it's not always the length that's the problem. But Greentea Peng manages to jam a hell of a lot of great stuff in the space of that album. I don't feel there's any fat on it.
2 hours of goodness in a 1 hour album.
Yeah, pretty much. It's pretty
Do you know
much
what?
Perfect.
I really like it when artists that have released a lot of singles don't have all those singles in their debut album, because I always find that if there are artists who put out 5 or 6 singles, then their album comes out and you're like, well, I've heard half this album already, what's the point? You know,
generally speaking, the other half is filler.
Yep.
Yeah, so no such mistake on Greentea Peng's part. She is just a creative powerhouse. I mean, and she's really showcasing all her best stuff on that album, which is kind of what I was hoping H.E.R would do. That said, though, I can't be that disappointed because, you know, H.E.R released 3, 4 EPs that are like album length, and they are all great. I like those a lot better. So I'll just pretend to myself that they are her debut album.
Yeah. If you're looking for a musical project that's shorter in length from a burgeoning, up-and-coming electro/R&B artist, Craig, I could direct you in the direction of the project, as she's calling it. Rebecca Black Was Here by Rebecca Black.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yep, that's right. Friday singer Rebecca Black
Yep.
has released her debut full-length project.
Well, how about that? How about that?
It's pretty weird. I kind of enjoyed it, but it wasn't like, you know, the new sound or anything.
Sweet. Is it going to be your number one album? Is it going to be...
don't
am
think
I going to enjoy it as much as the Tyler, the Creator album? Oh, wait, James... Is this an episode of fHipHopriety, the podcast where we discuss all things hip-hop?
Craig, we don't have time for this.
We need to do it really quickly, right? We'll do it really quickly and then we'll be right out of here, I promise.
Okay, in that case, cue the music.
Hello and welcome once again to another exciting edition of fHipHopriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things hip-hop music. And yes, there is nothing wrong with my voice. I am definitely speaking normally.
Yep, we have all the time in the world for this. We are not trying to
No rush.
get through this.
No
yeah.
rush. So yes, Tyler, the Creator, Call Me If You Get Lost, the title of his new album. Holy shit, dude. It's a perfect album.
Wow.
Everything you want from a hip-hop record. First of all, it's also quite long. Albums are long these days, aren't they? That's a conversation for another time.
These albums
but yeah,
they have nowadays.
But yeah, again, it's pretty much all killer, no filler. Interestingly, there's a real lack of hooks on it, which has upset a lot of people, because Tyler, the Creator, is actually quite well known for his hooks, and there's next to none on this record. He's just gone very, very raw, spitting bars. I spun it about 4 times consecutively the first time I listened to it, because I just could not stop listening to it. It's like, this is so fucking good. His lyricism is really, really smart. And I actually, after I listened to that 4 times, I then went back and listened to Flower Boy and H.E.R, and then went back to the new one. And honestly, those 3 are a perfect trilogy. It's crazy that an artist in a short space of time, like what, the space of 5-6 years, has released 3 such perfect albums. And they actually work... they actually kind of work as a trilogy in a way. They're a really satisfying listen. If you've got a spare 3 hours going, then I recommend it. I find it a very edifying experience.
Do you want a shock, Craig? Do you want to be shook?
Shake me.
I've not actually listened to any of Tyler, the Creator's solo work. I quite enjoyed some of the Odd Future stuff from back in the day, and I saw Odd Future live at South by Southwest, but I think, yeah, not much in the way of solo artists from Odd Future.
Intriguing. Well, I give it a spin. You'll definitely enjoy it. Alan, are you au fait with Tyler, the Creator? I know you enjoy
Yes.
some hip-hop.
I do indeed. I listened to it the day it came out. We were on a road trip to Dunfermline of all places, so we had Tyler, the Creator, bumping in the motor,
Sweet.
and I was down.
I will just flat out say it is definitely going to be in my top 9 of the year when we get to that point, James.
Future Craig is having a breakdown right now.
There has been, yeah, I'm already getting, my palms are sweaty just thinking about it.
His knees are weak.
Knees weak, mom's spaghetti.
The fact that I've already earmarked one of my 9 is really terrifying, but it's definitely going to be there. So yeah, well, we're in this very quick episode of fHipHopriety. I also remember speaking on the podcast previously about Backxwash, who's MC from Montreal, and she just dropped her debut full length, which is incredible. It's like a real kind of dark, evocative mix of very stripped down industrial hip hop. There's so much more texture going on top of the industrial stuff. Some great use of samples. You'll particularly enjoy, James. There's one song that has a Godspeed You Black Emperor sample, used to magnificent effect.
Murder on the dance floor, that one.
Yes, the famously Murder on the Dance Floor. That's a hip reference to a gig that Godspeed You Black Emperor played at Glasgow's Queen Margaret Union back in 2002 or something. And when they played the Dead Flag Blues, somebody in the crowd started doing the monologue from it, and then somebody else started changing it to the lyrics from Murder on the Dance Floor, and then everybody just joined in with the Murder on the Dance Floor version, and you can see the band looking at the audience going, what the fuck is going on? People make Glasgow. So yeah, Backxwash, highly recommend it. Backxwash is an incredibly talented, incredibly visionary MC. I think you'd both dig it, actually. So get it in your lugs. So unless you guys have any other hip-hop input...
No, I mean, honestly, I've like I said, I've hardly listened to any new music lately. I mean, if I had to say I'd listened to anything new of late, I mean, I did listen to the new Crypta album, obviously, but...
Wait, James, Crypta?
Uh-huh.
Is this an episode of fSobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things contemporary metal?
I think if we're going to do this, Craig, we really need to speed things along.
Yeah, right, we'll do it. We can do it. We've got time, man. Hey, you know how time works in Twin Peaks?
Cue the music.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of fSobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things metal.
Or in our usual case, we discuss all things Crypta / Nervosa, and boy have we got a treat today. Yeah.
Yeah, so that album we were feverishly awaiting due to our schedule. It did actually drop about 4 weeks ago, and we have not recorded an episode since then. So we've got a lot to catch up on regards to this album. First of all, I'm just going to flat out say that album is more than worth the wait. I am all over it.
Shit slaps.
It does. It's incredible.
Yeah, I should say Alan is also a fan, because I also, like a fucking tyrant, I've said, Alan, listen to this.
You're kind of evangelical in your love of both Nervosa and Crypta, and you're not fucking rightly so.
And you know what? Unlike the other albums we've discussed in the previous podcast within podcast within podcast, not that long.
No, that's true. It's a
It
sweet
does not
41
outstay
minutes.
its welcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could, from back in the day, from back in the 90s. Sorry, this is not a back in the 90s reference. But back in the 90s, you could fit this whole album on one side of a 90-minute tape. So
Yeah.
you could record it on. It's great. Any album that was longer than that wasn't worth your time.
I was listening to an interview with Fernanda Lira the other day, and she said that that was one of her intentions. She wanted it to be short. She wanted it to be that thing where you could fit it on one side of a 90-minute cassette.
That's amazing.
And the other thing she wanted to make sure was that, and I think the band have really succeeded at this, is that each of the tracks is significantly different from each other. Like, they're all recognisably death metal, but they all have, like, some tracks have a kind of a black metal thing going on, a few tracks have more of a melodic death metal thing going on. So a couple of tracks are a bit thrashier. Yeah. It is so satisfying to listen to. It's all the things I love about metal. In, I was going to say 10 songs, technically it's 9 songs plus the atmospheric thing at the start. But yeah, it's great. It's easily one of my favourite releases of the year. That may be getting earmarked for one of the 9, but I'm giving myself high blood pressure just thinking about that right now.
Alan, fetch the defibrillators. Craig's on the way out.
Clear!
Oh boy. But yeah, the guitar work. Metal is the only genre I get excited about guitar players. Like, ordinarily I don't really give a shit. I don't want to hear anybody talk about The Edge.
I don't like anybody talking about you two, full stop. Like,
Well, we park our cars in the same garage. Sorry, garage if you're an American listener.
I did. Someone posted a thing on Twitter where it was, it's that Twitter account where you post anonymous confessions. Mm-hmm. And one of the anonymous confessions was, "You two have had 2 or 3 really good albums. This is a hill that I'm prepared to die on."
I saw that.
And I got to use my Garrick from Deep Space Nine meme of him just with his hands in the air and the phrase, "Weird hill to die on, but at least you're dead."
But yeah, Sonia and Tyner are both amazing, and the riffs are incredible, the solos are incredible, and I've listened to it so many times now, I've got to that point where I can tell who's who. I love getting to that point. It's really exciting to say, oh, there's Tyner's solo. Yeah, it's great. They both have very distinctive styles. Like, Sonia's much more sort of classical and melodic, Tyner's a bit roar.
roar!
Yeah, it's a sweet, sweet listen. Everybody should listen to it. Even people who hate metal, get it in your ears, and if you don't like it, tough.
Remember a minute ago, listeners, when I said he's evangelical about this? Like, it's,
If you don't like it, at least you give it a shot. You can say, "I didn't like it, but I gave it a shot."
Yeah, but you should give it a shot. It deserves your attention. Alright, that's it. I think that's been another exciting episode of fSobriety, hasn't it?
I
We all
think
good?
so. Rock on.
not off.
Good ep.
Good app, good app. Alright, well, I think that wraps it up for another episode of fHipHopriety, yeah?
Yep. Yeah.
Alright, cool. Toodle pip.
Toodle pip.
Peace.
Good app. Those guys really know
Good
their hip hop.
Oh, yeah. We're looking forward to listening to those rap albums that they were talking about.
Yeah, those rap singers that they have now. Copyright Stuart Lee.
CNC Music Factory and whatnot, yeah.
Yeah. I think that just about wraps up for another episode of fSobrieTV.
I think you're right. Yeah, join us next time. Doodle
Doodle
pip.
pip.
Ah, good app. Those guys know their stuff.
Yep.
Okay then, boy. I'm just thinking. Just imagine a Roadhouse lineup with those acts. It sure would be better than the shite David Lynch gave us.
It'd be better than the Roadhouse lineup from episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah, part 4 particularly. But we'll discuss that further down the pike, as they say. All right, are we ready to dive in to some Twin Peaks: The Return insanity and goodness?
Woo! So this episode we are going to be discussing Twin Peaks: The Return, parts 3 and 4, Call for Help and Brings Back Some Memories.
We sure are. Both directed by David Lynch, both written by Mark Frost and David Lynch, as indeed the entire 18 hours was.
There's a credit you'll get used to, guys.
Yeah, indeed. So, James, let's just reminisce for a second. Where and when were you when you first saw this? Because I know where I was.
I was at home, sitting exactly where I am right now, in fact, watching the episode, because episodes 1 and 2 had aired on Showtime, if I remember correctly, and then episodes 3 and 4 were available to download, or on like the...
Yeah, they were on the streaming app.
They were on the streaming app, but obviously we were using alternative methods to get those episodes at the time. So we both went full on, got episodes 1 to 4.
We did. I remember toying with the idea after watching part 2. Maybe I'll leave the next 2 for next week. And then all of 2 minutes later I went, oh fuck this, I cannot wait, I need to watch more. If listeners have listened to our previous episodes, first of all, I don't know why you wouldn't. I don't know why you would start this podcast talking about parts 3 and 4, you weirdo. But whatever, it takes all sorts. Then you will know just how deeply and passionately we hold the Twin Peaks franchise in our affections. And how, like every Twin Peaks fan on the face of the earth, prior to the 21st of May 2017, we were absolutely electric with anticipation. So there was no way that I was going to be able to stop after part 2. I was like, no, I need more of this in my eyeballs right now.
If I remember correctly, I was, back when I still used Facebook, sorry Sam Ishmael, I was Facebook updating as I watched parts 1 and 2, and I remember I had a similar thought where I was like, you know what, maybe I won't watch part 3 quite yet, because it was really late by this point.
It's late, Sam. It's late, man. It's early. It's really early.
But I remember Eugene on Facebook leaving a comment on one of my posts saying, when you get to part 3, make sure to say hello. And I was like, I don't understand what this means, but I guess I'm going to have to watch it now. And I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, it was 4 hours of joy. Yeah, Alan. Now, I have a dim recollection of sitting with you as you watched this the first time, because just as I'm evangelical in making you listen to stuff, I was also evangelical about you watching Twin Peaks.
Fucking monster. Yes.
Now, I can't remember what our schedule was like. We probably watched the first 4 episodes in one sitting when I was watching with you, Alan. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
So, by this point, we've just seen Cooper escape the Black Lodge and fall through space. So before we watch this episode, what were you thinking? And I'll ask you the same question, James, in a second.
I mean, we've been doing at that point a pretty intense watching of pretty much most of David Lynch's output.
So we'd watched the whole original series intensively for a few weeks prior, interspersed with the odd David Lynch movie here and there.
Yeah, and they're very odd. And it was at this point I think I'd become almost numb to how like batshit bonkers most of his stuff is, but watching it again today, I've like realised you never really become numb to it. It is still completely mind blowing how he will just fuck with you for like 10 minutes and you're like, what's going on here? What is going on? I say 10 minutes, 18 hours or whatever, but I had no clue what to expect whatsoever. Like, obviously, yous are more tuned into the kind of fan base and whatnot. Like, you read the books, know a bit more about the lore and the kind of the behind the scenes stories and whatnot. So
yeah, looks like we got some readers.
Exactly.
To be fair, none of that stuff helped with episodes 3 and
No,
4.
it definitely did not. No.
No, I mean, episode 3, like when it starts off, I was just like, okay, right, there's a lady with no eyes, okay, and I'm like, did Coop free her or her mother, and she was the one who murdered Tracy and what's his chops?
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a bit. James, you've just seen Cooper finally leave the Black Lodge after 25 years. Did you have any assumptions about where Cooper was going to end up?
You're goddamn right I had assumptions about where Cooper was going to end up, Craig, and I'll tell you what I thought was going to happen.
Go for it.
I thought it was going to return to Glastonbury Grove, the curtains were going to part, and he was going to fall out, like he was going to land as if he'd fallen through the curtains, and we were going to be on for good Coop versus bad Coop, and that was Twin Peaks: The Return.
Interesting. All right, when part 3 started, I think I was on the train that was not going to happen, that there was going to be some other route. I was definitely still at this point on the train that we would get Classic Cooper. I was not anticipating the version we got, but I was anticipating the route towards it would be a lot more convoluted and maybe, you know, him just walking out the curtains. Lynch, I felt, made it very clear in part 2 that was not an option, that was not on the cards. So in part 3, yeah, I went into it thinking, okay, I don't know where the fuck this is going or what dark madness Lynch has in store, but it's definitely going to be a lot more complicated than him just coming back and everything just being a continuation. Yeah, I certainly did not anticipate anything of what transpired from here. And I think it was by the end of part 3, certainly by the end of part 4, where the that feeling that I had after the first 2 parts that we discussed, that we both agreed on this point, that you definitely got this feeling that no, there's no way this is going to be a nostalgia trip. This is something very, very different. Lynch is, in his own way, in that way that he does, playing around with the text in a very meta way, but not in a way that is... He's not doing it, you know, the Charlie Kaufman way, where you're constantly being told that that's what's happening. David Lynch does it his own way, where it's very much...
He's got his own M.O.
His own M.O., modus operandi, where the text itself just reflects the meta without actually... There's no exposition to that effect, you know? And it's that... in the same sense where I was talking in our previous episode about how... that first episode with Sam, where he's watching the glass box... How I immediately interpreted that as, oh, that's Lynch fucking ripping the piss at us, sitting waiting for something to happen on the telly. And I feel like that it's on that sort of level that Lynch plays with the meta aspect. Yeah, there's so much more to say about that down the line, but yeah, we'll push on with where this goes.
I'll tell you one thing though, not to jump ahead too much. In the rewatch that we're doing right now, I think it was about a little bit into episode 4. It's obvious now that we weren't going to get Cooper back for most of this series. This is
I've made
happening.
That same note.
Yeah. And at the time I was always like, oh, this is the episode where Cooper comes back. They're just going to do this for a bit and it's going to be done, and I'm like, nah.
Yeah, I made a note here. I'll just bring it up now. I did note somewhere in part 4, I was just thinking to myself, yeah, I think I knew on a certain level the first time I saw this that Lynch was basically telling me we were not getting Classic Cooper back. That's what he was telling me. And I think my resistance to that was it was something I couldn't help, you know, because it's just that thing that 26 years it was since the original series ended. And I was like, yeah, you go in, even if you don't want to have preconceptions, you nonetheless, it's natural, you're human, you know, that's what you're going to do. And for 26 years we all had time to fantasize about what a continuation of Twin Peaks would look like. I don't think there's anybody on this earth who ever envisioned a version of Twin Peaks continuing that did not include Classic Cooper.
Yeah, he is the, sorry for the pun, the linchpin.
Ayo!
And Lynch was like, nah,
Yeah,
pin, no pin for you. No pin badge, no less.
Yeah, oh yeah, I sent Alan that video.
Dude, I didn't even watch that, do you know that?
Right, Alan, you're fired.
Sorry. But I'm watching part 3 and part 4. I watched them yesterday and I watched them again today because I didn't take any notes, so I think, fuck it, I'll just watch them twice. And when Coop arrives in, like, what looks like somebody's breeze block, like, in between, like, the walls in the house or whatever, it's like, right, okay, he's jumped from one prison and landed in another, and then when he gets kind of torn out of that into the construct that is Dougie, and it's like he's, you know, once he finally gets to use the toilet, which, you know, we've all had that moment where you're doing a Frank Drebin pee, and he's like looking in the mirror again, and it's just like right back to how's Annie kind of thing. It's just like, oh Jesus, it was pretty much you've been told.
Let's go through this chronologically then. Part 3.
Well, what happens is we get the Twin Peaks intro theme, also known as Falling, and then immediately get into Dale Cooper falling through space into what I've called the real pink room. I know it's purple, but you know.
Yeah. A lot of people refer to it as the Mauve Zone. And the Mauve Zone is actually already You know what? Just Google the Mauve Zone. I don't have time to go into it.
The Mauve Zone sounds like a pure shite Glasgow nightclub.
It does a wee bit, yeah. But there's a lot of esoteric literature about the Mauve Zone, which is a thing elsewhere. I don't have time to go into it right now. Maybe I'll bring it up again on another episode. But yeah, so this is our first. What's really jarring about this, the first time you see it, and certainly the first time I saw it, when Cooper falls into that balcony, it's the completely unceremonious, very, very faint, quiet sound effect of him landing in there that is so kind of comical after his epic fall through space, you know? And it's one of those great contrasts that Lynch just does really well. And when he looks out over that balcony onto the purple ocean, that is so exciting and terrifying on so many levels, because this is a kind of landscape we have never seen in the realm of Twin Peaks ever before. And I do think that for a lot of people, this is one of the big signposts that if you were in it for a nostalgia trip, this is Lynch definitely shouting at you that, no, this is not the world you wanted, basically.
This ain't your daddy's Twin Peaks. Is what
this is a whole other universe, and you might not be comfortable here. So Cooper steps inside, and we get our first glance at Nado, or Nido, however you pronounce it, which is almost an anagram of Diane.
Yep, or Flydo, as I called her later on.
And I love the visual of Nido. It's a classic Lynch composition with that utterly horrific makeup that makes her look like her eyes have been gouged and her face slightly melted. But it's that thing where the makeup looks conspicuous, you know.
Like the woman in the Radiator.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it reminded me of.
This entire sequence really has got big Eraserhead vibes.
Yeah.
And it's very much Lynch returning to his kind of, if you like, art film roots, although I would argue he didn't necessarily ever leave those. But it's a real dive back into those aesthetics. I remember a funny thing I think a lot of people commented on the first time they watched it was they thought maybe there was something wrong with the streaming because of the jerky back and forth effect that Lynch puts over things here. That almost seems like kind of a faulty strip of stop motion footage. I really dig this stuff. It's just so jarring and so unsettling. One of the things I really dig about it is that I feel like it sort of fits into my view of the entirety of the return taking place within one moment, and these are like little fractured parts of that moment that don't quite align together, you know, and in between the gaps there's like possibilities for different ways the narrative could have gone, you know, and considering how the narrative plays out here, I think that backs that up. The other thing this really makes me think of visually is Francis Bacon, who I know is one of David Lynch's favourite painters. The composition of Nido sitting in the chair. Honestly, look up almost any Francis Bacon painting. The majority of his paintings are figures seated in extremely contorted kind of positions, and it's that same use of very vivid colour in the centre with much more muted colour and a lot of shadow, a lot of contrast in the background.
The 6 degrees of Francis Bacon.
Ayo!
Nido is also almost an anagram of no idea.
This is also true.
What I had at the time, and also she's getting no eyes, so you know.
I mean, he's not above a pun,
yes.
David Lynch. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was on one level kind of deliberate.
And Nido, as we discover, lives next door to Aurea Mayflower.
Might have to explain that joke.
Sorry, it's a Fargo joke, guys. Fargo season 4.
Fargo season 4. Aurea Mayflower, the character played by Jessie Buckley. She has an inimitable way of walking, where she basically just stomps everywhere. So the first time we saw this, what the fuck were we thinking? I don't know that I was thinking too much. I think the first time I saw it, being versed in Lynch's world, I was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to let this wash over me and see what happens. The way this is all put together is so... It's peak Lynch, you know, it's just... The sound design here is amazing. And the lack of dialogue on Nido's part, where it's just like sort of a lot of hissing breaths and kind of jerky movements with her hand. It's that kind of unsettling stuff that just verges on the right side of occasionally being funny. Like, there's part of it so absurd you kind of want to laugh at it.
I was laughing at it the first time I saw it.
Yeah.
I was laughing hysterically the first time I saw this because I could not believe what I was watching. I was genuinely sitting there because I remember we had a conversation basically along the lines of, like, before Twin Peaks: The Return. In fact, I say a conversation. We probably had this conversation a lot where we were talking about Twin Peaks completely, inexorably altered television and did stuff
Yeah.
that TV had never done before in the early 90s. And we're like, how is it going to be able to do that again now, given how much television has evolved? And while watching this, it was just like, he's done it.
Yep,
He's
AO,
done
here's how.
Yep.
Hold my beer, says David Lynch.
Hold my red room. So yeah, I was nuts watching this. And again, this time, it hasn't lost any of its punch. It's just
No,
like,
no,
I mean, I
absolutely.
think this is like the third or fourth time I've watched this episode specifically because I love this stuff. And
Yeah.
every time I'm like, what the fuck am I watching?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of this kind of stuff is just on a filmmaking level, you could excise this from it and just watch it on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And it would just be a pleasure to watch on its own, you know?
There's a lot of that through this whole season, right?
Particularly for me, the point when they just climb out onto the weird David Lynch device floating in space. There's such a weird mix in this episode in particular of the types of visual effects when you can tell there's a visual effects department doing something, and there's times you can tell David Lynch did this himself.
No, 100%. Yeah, and we know how hands-on David Lynch is in his filmmaking. He really likes to have his hand in the goo, you know? He likes to be that person making the gruesome makeup. I also remember a great quote from Catherine Coulson, who plays the log lady. Back in the day, she also worked on Eraserhead behind the scenes, and there was a great quote from her I remember reading years ago. I don't remember it word for word, but it was along the lines of, there were so many strange things in Henry's apartment, like there was a drawer just full of goo, and that goo was basically like butterscotch pudding with stuff in it. And David, every day, would make the butterscotch pudding. And she had this great line, she said, I think what upset David about when he got to work on bigger films, like The Elephant Man and particularly Dune, his big problem with Dune, as she put it, was that he couldn't make the butterscotch pudding. Alright, so let's tie some things up here, or speculate a wee bit, because this is the first time we see this realm, as we'll call it. This is the realm that we later learn is the home of the firemen. It's certainly in the same world. Whether or not they're in the same building, in the same vicinity, there's no way for us to know that, but we can certainly theorise about it. Here's one of the things, here's me just going to dive into theory territory for a second, right? See what you think of this. I feel like where the fireman lives is a very austere looking place, and the way that we see his domain in part 8, where we get that beautiful tracking shot up the cliff, it's always like a lighthouse in this, like a dark corner of the universe, you know. It's a very austere looking place. There's nothing particularly comforting about it. The only warmth in that whole place is from Senorita Dido, I think, because even the fireman, I think he seems very preoccupied. He doesn't have time to exude much in the way of warmth. What strikes me, but certainly I was thinking this today when I was watching part 3. At the start of part 1, when the fireman says to Cooper, "It is in our house now." Now, there's many ways we can interpret that, but one possible interpretation, I think I mentioned it last episode, is that Judy is essentially in the Palmer house and therefore infected everything, possibly infected the giant's domain, the fireman's domain. Given there's no sign of the fireman here, has the fireman had to evacuate? Is this because if you view it as one simultaneous moment or as a cycle, I think either works. Is this a moment in time when the fireman has already evacuated? Does this represent what happens after the fireman's been defeated? That's one grim way of looking at it. And the banging we get on
That's
the door
pretty grim.
is possibly Judy just marching her way or its way around the giant's domain, looking for any sign of life or any sign of resistance. I hadn't thought of that until today when I watched it. I realise it's not the most upbeat of interpretations.
Well, you want to know about downbeat interpretations? I did watch a video recently after I scoured the internet to try and find the Super Jacob video, and I finally found it and realised that Super Jacob had other Twin Peaks videos. He does a video based on someone else's theory about 3 realities, wherein he posits that Judy is not a force of evil but a force of good, and that Judy is preventing David Lynch from destroying Twin Peaks. And it is wild, and I highly recommend it if you're in it, you watch it. But yeah, it's like Judy is the thing that stops David Lynch from bringing Coop back and ruining Twin Peaks as a reboot.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll give that a watch. All right, so the socket here, the first socket we see, has the number 15. Now we know from having watched the entirety of The Return. The classic Cooper does actually return. Well, I should say Dougie Cooper exits in part 15. And we get classic Cooper back in part 16. And when the room changes after Nido pulls the lever, the socket changes to 3. The part that we are currently in, part 3, is Lynch deliberately making this connection?
I don't see. Here's what I thought. Made a note of this. I thought it was related to his room at the Great Northern.
I was going to bring that up as well. Yeah.
I wasn't sure why, but that's what I figured. I noted the numbers changing after Nido flips the switch and then does a Flydo.
I think
that was my thoughts.
I think where I'm coming from, though, is that both can be true. Like, the room number itself can also be part... We know how much David Lynch loves numerology. I don't know a lot about numerology, so I cannot entirely say why the number 315 in itself would particularly be relevant. It was indeed, for continuity's sake, it was always Cooper's room number in the original series. But I would not put it past David Lynch to put this detail in, even if there's so little likelihood of anybody picking up on it. That he was again. It's kind of I suppose it is another meta detail, that it's the show recognising its own artificial nature. If that were the case, it wouldn't be the first time he's done that. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of something like Inland Empire in the last 20 minutes of that movie, where we get the zoom out and we realise that what we've been watching for who knows how many scenes is actually the movie being filmed. Yeah,
it actually makes perfect sense when you put it into the context of most of Twin Peaks: The Return being this like flash, this vision that happens in one moment, because the perfect vision for Coop is he exits the Black Lodge, returns to Twin Peaks, defeats Bob, and that's it. And that would be a skip straight to, as you say, episode 50 or part 15.
Yeah,
and then part 15 to 17, and boom, you're done. That's the show. No, obviously not taking into account 18, which is essentially a different show at that point. But yeah, whereas Nido flips on him, and you get the weird new Twin Peaks.
Let's discuss that then. So they go out. We get the banging on the door. Nido ushers Cooper up to the top of the Eraserhead space box, and she pulls the lever, and she gets zapped. And she seems to know that's what's going to happen, and she falls off into space. I do love this moment, by the way. This Kyle MacLachlan's performance here, just that hopeless look on his face as she drifts off, is so fucking good. It's so affecting.
Kyle MacLachlan is really good at doing that. There was a moment where I was like, Dale Cooper is an idiot. And then I was like, oh no, this is what Dale Cooper was like when he first entered the Black Lodge. It's the same facial expressions and the, oh?
Yes, yeah. Just constantly disorientated.
Which, fair enough, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a pretty disorienting place, let's be real about it. And then we get the wonderful moment with Major Briggs's disembodied floating head uttering the words Blue Rose, which not only gives us the first clue that the decapitated body from part 1 belongs to Major Briggs. I don't know about you, James, but when I saw the phrase Blue Rose the first time, I said, yes! It was a jump out the seat moment.
I was like, this is one of Cole's Blue Rose cases. And somehow Briggsy knows about it.
Yeah. So Cooper goes back down, and it seems that the effect of the lever being pulled has basically changed the outlay of the room entirely. And we now have a new presence sitting by the fire.
I love the visual change when the lever gets pulled as well, and suddenly it's not that weird, hazy, like soft focus thing anymore. It's just like all the focus and colour just kind of becomes, I was going to say, as normal as it can be under the circumstances.
Yeah, it falls into sharp focus. Alright, so before we get into the American Girl of it all, what exactly are Nido's motives here, and how does she know to do it? And furthermore, is she right to do it, or did she fuck up here? Because I feel like there are ways you can definitely interpret it either way. She definitely seems terrified at the idea of Cooper going through the number 15 socket.
Is it because if he goes to part 15, he's going to miss finding Nido and freeing Diane?
Maybe.
Even though none of that happens.
Yeah, Cooper isn't actually involved in those things anyway.
But if he skips to part 15, then that won't have happened.
True, yeah. Yeah, it's an intriguing one. What makes this perplexing to think about is that we don't know, because it's never vocalised, exactly what Nido's thought process is here.
Yeah, other than the like hand across the neck, like nope.
Yeah, I love that baby. It's so creepy with the.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those many enigmas of Twin Peaks Return that there's no real concrete answer to. I mean, that's before we even get to the question of how did Nido even end up here, because we know that Nido in a sidebar. I'm going to come to probably, if not this episode, a future episode, but how uncomfortable I am with the fact that Nido, an Asian woman, is basically a shell for Diane. But I think we'll discuss that another time. But we do learn later that is effectively what she is. It's never explained to us why or how Diane, as Nido, ended up here in the fireman's realm, possibly evacuated realm, if you follow my theory earlier. Do we have any theories about that?
Who wills Diane's tulpa into existence? Is that Bad Coop as well?
I would assume it would have to be Doppelcooper, yeah. Because when we, in part 16, where Diane has the meltdown and she goes to shoot Gordon and then she gets chucked back into the Red Room, I've always read that as being, there is no real, to be fair, there's no reason to read it this way. I think it felt it was crossing more T's and dotting more I's if I just interpreted it this way. That when she's recapping what happened between her and Doppelcooper the night he assaulted her, it would make sense to me that that was the same night that he created the tulpa of Diane. So I've just always assumed that was the case. It definitely does complicate things a lot more, and there's no reason why that means that that's not correct. If you interpret that maybe someone else is responsible for creating the tulpa of Diane, I don't think so though, because we know that tulpa Diane is in cahoots with Cooper. Doppelcooper.
Yep, but Tulpa Diane has the memories of the assault.
Well, I assume that... yeah, that's a good point, because I was going to say I assume that her Tulpa just has the memories, but then that raises the question of why Dougie does not have Dale Cooper's memories, as far as we know. Oh my god. God, can't see this show. You know what, forget this whole thing. Let's go back to Mr. Robot.
Let's do our Sunset Beach podcast.
Yes, F Surf Centrally, it's coming. But yeah, there's a lot to think about there. It's a point now where it's almost kind of anodyne to say that there are a lot of enigmas in this season. But to me, that is one of the main ones, considering how crucial a role Diane plays in the end game of this season. There's a real mystery around how she even ended up here. How did she end up encased in Nido? I mean, I would presume the fireman in some way was protecting Diane, but I don't know the logistics of that, and it's never ever even hinted at.
This whole Diane Nido thing throws a weird shaped spanner into and gums up the works of the theory that I ascribe to.
Okay, go on.
That everything that happens when Coop is not wearing the badge isn't real.
Okay, yeah.
Because Nido exists while Coop is wearing the badge.
Yes.
And that fucks my whole thing. I don't get it. What are you on about? I don't understand, David.
David, please explain.
No, I won't explain it.
Speaking of not understanding, right? When Craig mentioned to me about doing this, and he was like, "We're going to rewatch Twin Peaks: The Return. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Aye, cool." So I'm seeing things popping up on Facebook and whatnot, and it keeps mentioning the fireman, and I was like, right, I watched Twin Peaks: The Return, and I'm trying to remember what the hell the fireman was, and I'm like, right, I know I've seen this program, but like a lot of it is just completely not in my head at the moment. So watching it just now, or watching it and you're talking about Nido, and I was like, right, clearly she was a big part of this program. I've just completely forgotten like what the hell happens for most of this series. So this is basically like me watching it for the first time, but knowing certain things that happen along the way. Like
that's excellent.
Well, that's great. That's
an excellent perspective to approach from as well. I'm not sure why Nido/Diane is in this particular point, but I'm sure at the point when she pulls the lever to change reality and gets popped off the top of the Eraserhead space cube, she's altering reality to a point where is she saying, no, think about this, and then like I don't know, or changing True Cooper's train of thought to if I did this would happen, or is it a memory of remember when this happened?
Oh, see, yeah, now you're getting into my territory. Yeah, see, I like that. That makes sense to me. Like, if the Eraserhead Spacebox in some way represents Cooper's own memory of everything he's done and is doing, in accordance with my "it's all one simultaneous moment" theory, and that the Giant's message to Cooper at the start of the return is not a set of clues, but is in fact a warning, then it could be part and parcel with that somehow Nido is also trying to remind Cooper, no, remember what the fireman said. And given that she's clearly at least existing in the same realm as the fireman, I feel like that makes some kind of sense. Again, such is the nature of Twin Peaks: The Return, we're never going to be able to walk away with a concrete interpretation of this. But I feel like it works. I feel like it works for me.
I think you're right, but at the same time, I'm always aware that I think I'm probably trying to ascribe too much Mark Frost thinking to this.
That's always the danger.
I should maybe just sit back and let it wash over.
This might actually be a good point to say. I think we do always have to remember that Twin Peaks is and always was the product of two creative minds with two very different approaches to how they create this work, and indeed two very different interpretations, I think, of what the work means.
Yeah, on the one hand, you've got the very literal, serialized, episodic, structured work of Mark Frost, and on the other hand, you've just got David Lynch's kind of emotional intelligence, where it's all about the intuition, and you just intuit. It doesn't matter. It's dream logic. So you've got logic and dream logic kind of running at the same time. So that there are points when, if you think about it too much, you fall too much into one side or the other.
Yes, I think that is a danger. I think it's sort of unavoidable, though, and it's part of what makes it fun. It's part of the game you have to play as a Twin Peaks fan to some extent. The other thing does occur to me, and see in these kind of sequences where the show is at its most surreal, and let's just say it, at its most utterly Lynchian, part of me does wonder how much of this was even scripted, and how much did David Lynch invent after the script was finished.
I wonder, because we know from the extras on the return box set, David Lynch complains about never having enough time to go really dreamy, that he didn't like that they were on a schedule, so I'm assuming this must have all been scheduled in some way, or at least partially scripted in some way. But I can think of it as Mark Frost sitting there, kind of, because obviously they did it over Skype,
they
right?
Did.
Tapping his watch.
Where Mark Frost typed it and David Lynch just said stuff. And I can imagine Mark Frost going, okay, so what we do? Oh yeah, Jacoby, right? So he's going to be this like Alex Jones figure, and David Lynch going, yes, and there's going to be a box, and it changes, and he does this, and Mark Frost just typing, literally going, okay, that's what we'll do.
I think that's sort of. I feel like that's what these sort of scenes were born from, and I feel like these were things that really Lynch embellished a lot when it came to shooting them. And when it came to the prep, I feel like David Lynch's brain works in that way, where once he gets closer to when he knows he's going to do the thing, that's when the ideas start going, oh wait, no, I should make that longer, and then I can do this, and I can put that in. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on. I feel it's a very organic thing that happens on set with David Lynch, and leading up to the days that he's going to shoot, that's very, very different from the part of his brain that's co-writing a script with Mark Frost over Skype. And we will never know the answers to this, really. But, yeah, it's hard not to speculate about it. Certainly, I think these scenes would have to have been in the script in some form, but how fleshed out they were, I think that's the bigger question.
Do you know what I'd really love? I know it's probably not this. This is me just, like, making stuff up, but my, like, perfect headcanon for that is they've got the idea that, okay, he leaves the Red Room, but he becomes someone else, lives someone else's life, and Mark Frost going, right, so how do we connect those two things? And David just going, I'll figure it out on the day.
Yeah, no, that totally
There'll be
figures.
a whole Team America World Police spew thing, and we'll go from there.
There's a lot of blown chunks in this
episode.
Oh shit,
It was so gross.
This transition is fantastic. Cooper's exit from the room is incredible. It's the most Eraserhead thing Lynch has done since, Eraserhead. It's incredible. I mean, even the cartoony way that Cooper horizontally just phases through the socket, it's just so incredible. It's the kind of thing that any other show in any other context, that would just be like, what the that's just bullshit. Whereas with everything that Lynch throws at you in this, you're just like, by the time you get to Cooper just, being like a fucking mannequin being shoved through an electrical socket. You're like, alright, whatever. Fine. Okay.
I like that.
You've
Legit.
beaten me into submission, Lynch.
I love that his whole body and all his clothes go through, except for his shoes.
His shoes.
The shoes coming off is perfect David Lynch
I
humour.
have some notes about that, but before I do, there's one other thing in this scene that I just want to talk about briefly, because I do wonder about this, and I've wondered about it ever since I first saw it.
Is it Ronette Nolansky?
Right, so...
or Ronot?
Alan, I don't
Nolansky?
know if you picked up on this, or if I told you about it, but the second woman in the scene, once Nido disappears, she is played by Phoebe Augustine, who played Ronette Pulaski in the original series, who, if you remember who Ronette is. She's not credited as Ronette in the credits, however. She is credited purely as American Girl. Now, what does that mean? Lynch, stop fucking with us, damn it. As I was watching it today, one of the things that did occur to me was along the lines of what you just said earlier, James, about this being a device by which to remind Cooper of certain things. Mm-hmm. And it sort of makes sense, like in that way when you have it, when you're in the realm of dreams and your subconscious just shoves things at you. Quite often it will dredge up something from 10 years ago that you haven't thought about and you've no reason to ever think about, and it'll be some person you maybe knew for a day, but suddenly they're back in your mind just for one night for no particular reason. But maybe they'll have a different name. That kind of shit happens in dreams, and we know how much David Lynch loves his dream logic. So is it just operating on that level, that this is part of the device by which, Cooper is being made to remember, and it just so happens that this is just one part of his subconscious, that it doesn't particularly matter what face this entity uses. It's just plucked something from Cooper's subconscious that's in some way tangentially relevant to how he ended up in this mess. Or
I like that
or
idea.
is this literally Ronette Pulaski in some way or other?
I like the idea that it's both, and here's what I mean. It's the idea that the entity that's reminding him of all this, and basically at this moment where he's remembering stuff that he's done that was a mistake, whether he knows it or not at the time. When quote-unquote American Girl appears and is like, my mother's coming, he sort of just ignores her and fucks off and does his own thing. And it's kind of like the way Ronette was kind of sidelined because of the investigation into Laura's murder.
Ooh.
Like Ronette's kind of, once she wakes up in the hospital, they're like, okay, right, cheers, bye, and then they just kind of bring her in at the end. But her trauma and everything just gets fully sidelined in the
good
series.
No, I like it. I think actually we only spent one episode talking about the original series. There's so much more we could have said. I will say I think the treatment of Ronette in season 2 is one of the least satisfying aspects. Again, though, it is something that was definitely caused by the network forcing Frost and Lynch to reveal the identity of the killer. And so by the time
that was such a great idea, like well
right,
done.
good plan, guys. What could go wrong?
But again, it's something that Lynch kind of took steps towards fixing with the movie.
Yes, yeah. And Ronette, yeah, you're right. Ronette does become a character with much more agency in Firewalk with Me. Yeah, I like that, James. I think you've hit on something that's actually quite vital. Do you know something, by the way? When the amount of podcasts I listen to about Twin Peaks, and I'm going to own up, I listen to an awful lot of them, more than is healthy.
I see you alone in a small apartment with a lot of Twin Peaks podcasts. Jesus, that's a lot of Twin Peaks podcasts.
Quite honestly, the amount of time and energy, mental energy I spent accumulatively in my life thinking about this show is ludicrous. But the fact, there's so many hours of podcast listenage that I've done on top of that, yeah, it's definitely unhealthy. But I hear very, very few of them ever talking about this aspect that we're talking about right now. Like the meta aspect is something, it does get referenced, but people tend not to dive into it too much. And I think part of the reason is it's because Lynch doesn't do it in an expositional manner. He really does it in that way where you can either pick it up as an interpretation or leave it, and it seems a bit too esoteric to pick up, so I think a lot of people don't bother. I think it's worth, for future episodes, carrying this along, see where we can see connections to this further along the line. Quite excited about that, because even though that was always in my mind, I've never thought about it too thoroughly. Alright, so we'll keep track of that.
We'll need to have a jingle for it.
So the shoes, I was going to say, I feel like there is a symbolic thing about shoes all the way through the entire Twin Peaks franchise. There are so many references to shoes in the original show, Like the fact that Philip Gerard, the one-armed man, is himself a shoe salesman. And we know that, of course, he is spiritually very important to the entire... the whole Red Room and the lodges.
Would you say he's the soul of the show?
Hey, this guy. This is why we have you on, Alex. Nobody can lace your boots when it comes to comedy. So yeah, I feel like there's this... I don't know how to interpret it because Lynch has never really gone too far with exploring it, but it is one of those things that pops up again throughout the original series, and I feel like it's played around with a wee bit in The Return. But I kind of feel like when you put on your shoes, you know that you're grounded, as it were, and it allows you to go outside, it allows you to traverse the world, you know. There's also a sense of identity, I think, associated with a person's shoes. Like, everybody's shoes are different, you know. I mean, albeit you have your popular brands of shoes, but it's like when you go to a party and everybody takes off their shoes, everybody knows whose shoes is whose, you know. Shoes always look different and they're always moulded to the wearer's feet after a few wears, you know. And I feel like this is me going right down the rabbit hole of how I know Lynch thinks about utter fucking minutiae. Okay, so I'll go back to Philip Gerard, right? We know he's a spiritual messenger and a spiritual conduit in the original show, and I would say all the way through the franchise. The fact he's a shoe salesman, I sort of feel like this on a certain level, Philip Gerard is trying to kind of keep people in Twin Peaks grounded and away from the Black Lodge, right? That's me going to phrase it in the most crude way possible. Like, he's going to make sure they're grounded in a route that's going to keep them on a path that's, you know, going to keep them away from Bob and all the things that were the big bad in the original show. I think that was an interpretation I always had, like when I was really young, when I first watched the show. It was just one of those weird kind of tangents that my mind went off on. But you also get the whole thing with Leo. Leo's obsessed with his shoes. Leo needs a new pair of shoes, he says to Bobby and Mike.
Clean my boots, Shelley!
Right, exactly. And Bobby finds the cassette that Leo has hidden in his boot in season 2.
You're talking about the way shoes represent character and stuff as well. There's the obvious moment of Audrey Horne changing her shoes when she gets to school.
Yeah.
And Lynch really lingers on that.
And not a creepy Quentin Tarantino way.
I was thinking of a Tarantino gif. Yeah.
But yeah, and that's when her true character is revealed, when she puts on those red heels. Like,
I thought it was the just the kind of obvious Wizard of Oz thing. Like, that was my thoughts with the shoes. Like, he doesn't get his shoes until later on. Like,
that definitely works too. Lynch is a huge Wizard of Oz fan.
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, Wild at Heart and whatnot in it. But
yeah. Okay, let's talk about Doppel Cooper's Wild Ride. This is one of my favourite sequences in the entirety of The Return. Do you know what's particularly joyful about it? Kyle MacLachlan's ridiculous facial expressions. It's like, Doppel Cooper is terrifying. Like, the first 2 episodes, he is super scary, and suddenly Kyle MacLachlan is
goofy
throwing
as
his
hell.
goofiest faces, and it's like, wow, this guy really is out of it right now. But it's interesting that, you know, that's how Lynch lets us know. No, this is what this character looks like in peril. You know, he loses his equilibrium, he loses his power, and so he just turns into a fucking goofball. And this is the most terrifying prospect for Doppel Cooper. The last thing he wants is to get whisked back to the Black Lodge. He even explicitly says so in part 2.
and he's got a plan for it.
Yeah. And so all this goofy, wild Jim Carrey-esque face shit that Kyle MacLachlan pulls, I'm here for it. It's amazing.
Especially when we know we've seen him be a badass already, and we know he's a badass from the whole show.
If this was our first scene of Doppel Cooper, you fucked it, Lynch. But the fact we've had those moments where Cooper is genuinely terrifying, it's like...
I really love when the car crashes and rolls, and he sees and the red curtains are appearing in front of him and stuff. It's like, that's how you get back. You just get whisked through. Not today, Mike.
Yeah. He had a plan for that one.
See, when he's crashing and then he's like staring at the cigarette lighter, I'm like, why is he staring at the cigarette lighter? And then like
electricity.
Yeah, that's it. Like, but then Cooper is looking at the sockets, and then Dougie Jones is looking at the sockets. Yeah, and I'm like, all right, of course, electricity. Like, that's like the whole thing. And I was like, right, okay. But it was my second watch through today, like, because I watched it yesterday. But the second watch through today, I was like, electricity, man. Like, remember Fire Walk with Me, whatnot. Like,
Yeah.
Aye. So it was kind of annoying me the first time. I was like, why does he keep staring at the fucking cigarette lighter? Is it about the cigarette lighter? It's not
I
about
think
the
there was
cigarette
some
lighter.
part of me thought the first time I watched it that Coop was going to come out of the cigarette lighter.
Yeah. And they were going to have a fucking fisticuffs, social fisticuffs, in the motor as it's crashing. I think if Tarantino had directed this, that's what would have happened.
To a, Bollywood rock and roll 60s number, like, no doubt.
When it cuts suddenly to Dougie Jones,
Yeah,
you're like,
so-
what? Who the fuck is this guy?
I remember messaging you, James, going,
Schlubby
wait,
Jones.
there's more Coopers? What the fuck is going on?
Kyle MacLachlan's Dougie Jones' voice is fucking
It's
amazing.
incredible. He does very little with it, but it's just enough that lets you know, oh no, this is a totally different character.
Yeah, like, oh, it went to sleep.
I know, it feels tingly. I mean, it's such, we'd get very little of it, but it's just so great. You feel like you know what Dougie Jones is all about just in that short moment. Yeah, so this, man, see, watching this the first time around, there's just so much to take in. Because Lynch's mise-en-scène is what Lynch does, He doesn't really... You don't really have a moment to sit and go, wait, hold on a fucking second. Why am I seeing a third Kyle MacLachlan? Because he just keeps... Yeah, there's an aggressive way in which Lynch is nonchalant, if you know what I mean, by just moving on with that scene, and you're like, no, but wait, there's another fucking Cooper. Why aren't you making more of a big deal about this? Like, there's no dramatic music, there's no big sting, there's no major close-up. It's like, no, here's a schlubby version of Cooper with a sex worker. Enjoy. It's like, what?
That would have been the cliffhanger of another show, wouldn't it? Like, that would have been the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Or any other show would have flashed back at that point to being back in the motel room where he's lying there with the what's her name that he kills?
Daria.
When he said I've got a plan for that, would have flashed back and he would have said, I've created the Tulpa, a third version of me who's going to be drawn into the Black Lodge.
Do you think there's a deleted part of the script that Mark Frost wrote that? And Lynch went, nah.
No.
I don't think so, Mark. That's not going to work.
It's called show, don't tell. It's called show time, Mark, not tell time.
My hat is always off to Lynch in the way that he can make something seem bizarre and extraordinary just out of presenting something utterly ordinary. Because that scene between Jade and Dougie is utterly ordinary. There's no, even the way it's lit and everything is like as close to verity as Lynch gets. Like, it's mostly natural daylight, and obviously with it being a show home, it's all very sparse. It's so, everything about it is so ordinary and so banal. But what makes it extraordinary is the fact that you're watching it in the context of classic Cooper being zapped through a fucking socket and Doppel Cooper crashing his car. And you're like, oh, what? Where am I? What's happening right now?
When you were saying earlier about like the way he just kind of like materializes like horizontally, and he's just lying there, you're watching this, and it's like it's so ordinary. It's like Jade is just like, right, Dougie, come on. Oh, wait a minute, have you had a haircut? Have you lost weight? Is that a different suit? Were you sick? We need to go. Like, just pure, like, nothing phases this lady, man. Just pure, here we go.
We instantly love Jade.
Yes.
I love the weird time jump though from when like Jade's in the shower and she hears the
what the fuck
and she's
was
like,
that?
What the fuck is that? And then the next scene she's fully dressed and ready to go. She's like, what was that noise?
Hair's dry. Yep.
Jade gets dressed quick, man.
All right, so a few notes before we continue with that. We get the interlude with Mike the One-Armed Man with Dougie when he's zapped into the Black Lodge. Or the
that's heartbreaking, man.
Or the Red Room, if you want to call it the Black Lodge. There is still debate about this. That's a separate subject. The continuing magnificence of Kyle MacLachlan's performance here, when he says, I feel funny. What's happening to me?
As his arm just
looked at his hand.
That's
like, oh, that's weird.
Goes full Jeremy Beadle.
Yeah, it's another hip reference for the kids out there.
The visual effects of Dougie disappearing are so weird.
Yeah.
Because the hand shrinking and the ring coming off looks fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Aye, and then it's just like, what?
Everything after that is pure nightmare. Nightmare with a K. Yeah. That's a hip reference to a 1980s kids TV show in the UK. I mean the video, the digital effects there are naff as fuck, but they're naff as fuck in that David Lynch way that it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sound effects as well. It's like
Pop. Yeah.
Aye. Pop goes the doggy.
There is an argument out there, and it's one that I have some sympathy with, even though it doesn't spoil anything for me. But I do remember a lot of chat at the time that some people of the original show, and particularly big fans of Fire Walk With Me, were a wee bit disappointed with how the Red Room is portrayed in The Return, because the Red Room classically was a scene of dark mystery, a really foreboding place generally, whereas in The Return it does become a little bit cartoonish. It becomes a
But
very
is that
different
maybe
vibe.
because everything else is so dark? Like, it's just, in contrast, it's not quite as foreboding anymore because everything else looks so, run down and...
Yes and no. I mean, I do think that the way Lynch treats the action in the Red Room in The Return is notably different from the way he did it the first time round. I mean,
I suppose the end of episode 2, when the floor starts moving, is
Right,
kind of
right,
House of Horrors, like a fairground,
yeah,
rather
that's not.
than like a
I
horror
mean,
thing.
that's not the kind of thing I ever foresaw we would see in the Red Room.
No.
And this, likewise, the tone of this is so kind of comedic, as well as being like, as I say, my mind reeling with what the fuck is going on? Who is this other fucking Cooper? There is a sense of it being a bit more light-hearted. I think even Al Strobel's performance as the one-armed man, there's even a kind of lightness in his performance in a sense. Like
he seems more like a kindly uncle rather than some terrifying presence.
Right,
Like,
yeah, and his delivery to Dougie is like someone manufactured for a purpose. I mean, it's very matter of fact. There's none of the big kind of... we're so used to that character classically being projecting a whole lot, shall we say.
I kind of took it though, it's just because Dougie isn't real. Do you know what I mean? It's like talking to the toaster saying you're broken. But at the same time, we're saying it's funny and whatnot, but I found that bit genuinely heartbreaking when Dougie just was like, I feel funny, and then just pops out of existence. It's like, it's so sad.
I feel like genuine sympathy in Al Strobel's performance when he's saying to him, you were manufactured for a purpose. I don't think it's just like, oh well, talk to the toaster. It feels like he's just saying like, time's up, man, we were not expecting this, you've been fucked with Jeremy Beadle.
Like Mike is also kind of surprised at this turn of events, so maybe that's like more what it is rather than just talking to an inanimate object. It's more just, you shouldn't exist, what the hell's going on? Like,
yeah.
But I love that he shields his eyes for what seems like an eternity before the flash. Like he knows it's coming. So yeah, it's odd. The Red Room / Black Lodge still freaks me out, even when it's cartoony and stuff.
Yeah.
It still freaks me out.
It's the noise, right? It's the backward stuff, like the echo of the footsteps, and everything is just creepy as hell. Like even when it's not quite as dark.
In the constant walking around down the corridor in another room that's identical, and then it just keeps going. That
is innately nightmarish.
It's like the worst, most terrifying episode of Scooby-Doo.
But yeah, I mean, all of this is played out while, as a viewer for the first time, who's been a long time Twin Peaks fan, is noting things like, holy shit, A, there's another Cooper, B, he's got the ring on, the ring from Fire Walk With Me.
Yep.
And then all the stuff with the sockets and the electricity, I'm like, oh, this is Fire Walk With Me-tastic. There's so much going on in my brain, I am overwhelmed. And at the end of it all is literally this cartoonish segment of, sorry, but you were manufactured for a purpose, head pops, gold ball. All of this happens in the space of 5 minutes. And the first time I saw this, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing to me, David Lynch? What is happening? I've waited 25 years to see references to the ring and to the electricity, and now you're presenting me in this montage with a Cooper that I've no idea where it came from, and all this cartoony shit with Mike. Stop! Let me just breathe for a second.
There's no breathing time because Jade's got to give 2 rides, and the second ride, I should say, and Doppelkoop's got to fucking lose his Garmin Bozia lunch along with a bunch of weird black tar, and it's just, oh my
equal
God,
parts blood.
it's disgusting.
That's the scorched engine oil, I always assume, from the opening at Glastonbury Grove. But yeah, the conspicuous creamed corn in there, because of course. It's gross. That vomit scene
so
is
nasty.
gross. And Kyle
It's the
MacLachlan,
way he catches it, it's
Yes.
pouring through his fingers. It's just like,
Kyle MacLachlan gives good.
Here's the thing: I don't know if practically him doing that with his hand over his mouth is just to hide the pipe that's spraying the stuff out, but it looks genuinely like he's trying to hold
It
in
does,
vomit,
yeah.
and it's just going
Yeah,
everywhere. It's like it's a disgusting but really well done practical effect.
Alright, so that all happens.
And he totals that link, and that's some fucked up product placement.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Buy American.
Cooper comes out and we see where Jade and Dougie have been. It's essentially an empty house. And it's an empty house in a large street of mainly empty houses. And this whole Rancho Rosa, as we learn it's called, which is another double R. I see what you're doing, David Lynch, Mark Frost, your constant doubles of everything. This is pretty much emblematic, and I believe Mark Frost actually went out of his way to actually explain this, literally, as this is wont. In an interview, that this is basically emblematic of a lot of neighbourhoods that sprung up like this during the 2000s, that they were expecting a big house buying boom. And then, of course, what happened in 2008, 2009, there was a big financial crash, and so a lot of these houses just remained empty. And it looks like so many of these developments will just end up being demolished without ever having been inhabited.
If only there were people who didn't have houses, you know. Like,
Weird,
it's
huh?
crazy.
But what I especially love about this is, on the one hand, it does give you that sense of desolation on a real world level that Mark Frost was definitely going for. But what I really like about it also is that it's like Cooper is emerging into a ghost version of a neighbourhood, which is like the polar opposite of the original Twin Peaks, which was very warm, very full. Everybody had a home. Every home was filled, you know. And here he is. He's exited to this ghost town that doesn't even have any ghosts because no one has ever lived there.
A shell of a man, a shell of a town. Like
Exactly.
Yep.
And I feel that aesthetically it's one of the most powerful things about the whole of the Return. Just the existence of this place. It's a really, really well-chosen idea and well-chosen location. The other thing or note I've got here, I have to say, I do find a bit problematic. And again, it's that Lynch thing. And I said it about Daria in our previous episode. But the first time we see Dougie, he's in the company of Jade. Dougie is fully clothed, and of course Jade is naked. And it's like, Lynch, come on, man.
What are David Lynch's two favourite things? Industrial spaces and nude women, as he literally said in an interview. So
he's old school, Craig.
But it's like, the first shot. I mean, all it would take, even if Dougie had his shirt off, it would have been fine. But the fact he's sitting there,
but that would have been more. They'd have need to have done like a.
That's true.
And stuff.
That's true. But there would have been a way of shooting it. I don't know, man. It just makes me feel really uncomfortable. The other side of it is also, and I know we've kind of alluded to this before, but when it comes to portrayals of race on screen, Lynch is not the best. And the fact that Jade is one of a handful of black characters in the entirety of Twin Peaks, none of whom are major characters. The first shot we get of her is she's completely nude and kind of objectified in that first scene. I mean, she very quickly becomes quite a realised character with a sense of agency, so I'm not going to get too upset about it, but it just bothers me every time I see that scene the first time. But yeah, anyway.
David Lynch lives inside, like in his head anyway, like a 1950s America, like where it's like mom's apple pie and whatnot.
You're absolutely right, and I'm actually going to bring that up again for the next episode for part 4, because there's something I have to say about that. But you're absolutely right. I think David Lynch he's so guided by his unconscious that I don't think. He's certainly not excluding people of colour deliberately.
He's not Tim Burton.
No, right, exactly. I still kind of get away with that quote, man. It's fucking unreal. If you don't know what we're talking about, Google Tim Burton, people of colour. You'll see. He said an amazing thing that's just like, what? Anyway, people of colour don't belong in his movies, apparently. But yeah, I don't think David Lynch is doing that. I think it's just so much of his inspiration comes from things he absorbed as a child. That the way he views the world, at that time when he was growing up, all the faces he saw were white most of the time. All the faces he saw on telly were white. all the faces he saw in movies were white. I think it is largely reflective of that. There's definitely a bigger conversation to be had about that, but it's maybe for another time. The other thing I do just want to say, though, I think it's weird that the only black woman in this whole show happens to be a sex worker. For the record, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a sex worker. I just think that it only becomes problematic if your only black female character happens to be one. It's like, I mean, if there'd been just... Actually, this is a larger problem I have with the show generally, The Return generally, is that there are more than a few characters you could easily have made a different race, and it would have made all the difference. Like, for example, Tammy could easily have been black or Latino or Asian or anything. There's no reason why she has to be white.
David Lynch wouldn't have got what's her name again?
His pal, Crypta Pell, yeah.
That's obviously white.
But I feel like there was really good opportunities here for representation in a way that actually would have been interesting to the story, you know? Like having Tammy, I'm not picking on Tammy, I'm just saying, but because she is a pivotal... because she is a pivotal character in the show, I just think it was a good opportunity just to bring something else into the story there. Surprised maybe Mark Frost didn't suggest it, you know? It is where the show falls short, in my opinion.
This is where we find out that David Lynch has a pure neckbeard, and he's just like, I wrote these characters as white, damn it! It's integral to the story.
He's a mad racist.
Yeah.
We're like, he's not like that. It's David. He just probably grew up seeing white people. He's like, I only want white main characters.
KKK Lynch.
Yeah. Keep your woke shit out of my show, Frost.
Go woke, go broke. So Jade very comedically gets exasperated with Dougie, but also, you know, she's persistent with him and gets him where he needs to go. Jade is a great character here. This is where my complaint of earlier is redeemed a wee bit. Because I do think Jade does seem quite fully formed in the short time we get with her.
Aye, she's not a throwaway, like, just in the scene and then never thought of again. Like, you'll remember her for the rest of it. Aye.
And she's also more on the ball than just about any other character in Vegas when it comes to Dougie. Because, quote-unquote, Dougie...
Forget you ever met me.
I think you better see a doctor. Maybe you've had a stroke. I mean... Any sensible person would say, yeah, that seems to be the case.
Yep.
Whereas almost every other person, as Cooper begins to Mr. Magoo his way around Las Vegas, very few people really say anything significant other than, you feeling all right, Dougie? It's like, no, clearly this man cannot function. It's like, what the fuck?
Was he okay? I don't think he was okay.
Yeah, to quote Candy Shaker. So she gives him Dougie's shoes, which means he's now grounded in this world.
And he is no longer wearing his FBI badge that he had on moments before.
Are you keeping up at home?
But what he does have is the Great Northern Hotel room key in his back pocket.
Which gives us one of the funniest scenes of the whole programme, as far as I'm concerned. Like, when the two guys are watching, and one's, like, at the rifle, and Dougie, like, digs into his pocket and pulls out the key and drops it. It's just, I don't know... Keystone Cops.
The Great Northern Key wants to get where it's going. It seems it's like a talisman, you know. It needs Cooper to survive in this moment. A note on this, though. On the key, it says, clean place, reasonably priced. That is not an advertising slogan from the Great Northern. That is how Agent Cooper described what he needed from Harry before he got to the Great Northern. Which leads many people, including myself, to theorise, is any of this real? And is this key in Cooper's pocket just a talisman of his own imagination or his own subconscious?
Going by what you've just said, I'm going to say yeah.
Yeah, in which case Dale Cooper is the racist, not David Lynch.
Case closed. But yeah, the line, clean place, reasonably priced, it doesn't even fit the Great Northern. Because that's not how... The Great Northern is a grand hotel. Mm-hmm. It would not advertise itself with that slogan. I mean, that's like the bare minimum, you know? And that's what Cooper says to Harry in the pilot. I don't need anything fancy. Just a clean place, reasonably priced.
And we can assume that it's not reasonably priced because he gets a good rate because Sheriff Truman gets him a good rate.
Exactly, yeah.
That's Sheriff Harry S. Truman, for those of you playing at home.
Should be too hard to remember that.
So while the shit men are trying their best to take out Dougie, yeah, that's when we get the women across the road shouting 119, 119.
119. Alan, you had something to say about the 119 lady?
Yeah, just what? What was the 119 lady?
She's the evolution of the 118 guys.
Another hip reference.
Got your number?
Yeah, she's calling 911 backwards.
Yeah, no, like, aye.
While getting mad on Sparkle, while her kid just sits there.
Well, I know the kid is eating saltines, and I don't believe you get saltines over here, but whenever I hear or see saltines, it immediately makes me think of Harold Smith from season 2 of Twin Peaks, when he offers Donna some saltines. Because when I saw that for the first time, I was like, what the fuck is a saltine? And he says, I have some saltines and some apple butter. And to this day, I don't know what the fucking apple butter is.
Something that you eat before you refuse to go outside and then just claw your face up with some gardening implements.
Yeah. Oh, would you like to wash your hands?
Oh, hey, Harold was ahead of his time.
He certainly was, yeah. Staying at home and obsessed with washing his hands.
Maybe we should all be eating saltines and apple butter.
Yeah, and harbouring the secret diaries of murdered teenagers and other healthy pursuits.
Getting weirdly obsessive about orchids. Creepy bastard.
I feel like that maybe that was the least of his crimes, to be honest.
Okay, so in terms of shots in Twin Peaks: The Return, few shots, in my opinion, are more beautiful than the light over the sheriff's station. I don't know if they set the camera up and waited for that to happen, or if they were just filming an exterior shot and they got lucky. That is a stunning piece of photography.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It also feels like a real coming home moment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The argument will go on indefinitely as to how much Lynch is genuine about wanting us to be feeling at home and how much he's just playing with us. But in that moment, it definitely feels like... I think I said this in our previous episode. I know I definitely said it to you repeatedly, Alan, when we were watching The Return. But every scene in the sheriff station, it just... I have endorphins just going off every time I'm there. Yeah. Because so much of the original show took place in that building. And to have these actors back in that place is just so fucking cool. And every time I see that building, I just get so excited. And seeing Lucy at her reception desk and seeing them all gathered in the conference room.
And Davy's mad hair.
Yeah, it's just so satisfying. I just love it so much.
Which is probably why, other than the fact that he's a complete tool, like Chad is just he's completely intruded on the moment, right? Like, just like, fuck's sake, Chad.
Chad's the worst, right? We all know that. There's no denying. But Chad is also like the normal guy in that scenario.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're in this situation where all this weird shit's happening, you'd be a cunt about it. You'd be like,
true. Well, I think you could argue that Frank and Chad are like the two sides of how a normal person would react.
Yeah.
Frank, even though he's a Twin Peaks resident, he wasn't involved in the original series, the events of the Laura Palmer murder and everything else. So in that sense, he has got a slight outsider's perspective. But I do feel he's a bit more grounded than the other characters and like more sort of based in the real world. And so I feel like he and Chad are sort of two different sides of that coin.
Yeah, we have listeners in the United States. More listeners, would you believe, Alan, in the United States than we do in Britain? America, fuck yeah! So I'm not sure of the exact demographic of those listeners, but if any of our listeners in the United States are Indigenous Native Americans, could you hit us up on Twitter or leave a comment on Facebook and let us know if chocolate is a remedy for gas?
Yeah, we never got the answer to that question. Everything about this scene, though, when Hawk puts up the donut disturb sign, and then we see that Andy and Lucy are in there with all the Laura Palmer case files on the table. I love it. I love it so much. I love the atmosphere of it. It's so great. But yeah, the interplay between these three classic, iconic Gen 1 characters is so great. And it's amazing how these three actors all slip back into those roles just impeccably. It's one thing picking up a character that you played years ago, but to pick up a character and also play as if 25 years have passed for that character, that's a different thing.
Yep.
And I feel like every actor in this scene just does a great job. The chemistry between the three of them is so fucking good. It's so satisfying to watch. I really enjoy the inference that these days Hawk has quite a bit more authority than he did back in the day.
Aye, definitely.
He's definitely a lot bossier than he was in the original series. And I'm like, that's fine, he's earned it.
Yeah, I mean, who are you going to give the authority to? Him or Andy?
See, who else are you going to ask to tomahawk a guy in the back and never have it mentioned again?
I like how they also brought in the other murderer who gets away with it. I know that's the next episode or whatever, but
someone's like, Bobby killed a guy, and Hawk's like, we've all killed a guy.
Welcome to the Force.
So we discover that it's not about the bunny.
Yeah, this will let it play so good. Also, man, see, even just seeing the sight of that package of chocolate bunnies, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
The first time I saw this, it made me so happy. I was like, that is the actual... I mean, I know it's not the actual one they used back in the day, although who knows.
Yeah.
But the fact they made that prop, I'm like, oh, that is so great. That is so cool. I'm holding in my hand a small box of chocolate bunnies.
I love the fact that Lucy ate one of them is just perfect.
Yeah, it's peak Lucy.
There are little moments in this and the next episode that just discuss stuff that happened either in the original series that we didn't see or just after the original series that are just like pure chef's kiss, man.
Yeah, it adds such richness to the text, I think, each of those little touches. And I think each one of them is handled so well in terms of, like I say, I mean, the characters are just so pitch perfect that, and the writing does just enough that it's like, you know, it's totally believable that the stuff they're talking about took place in the universe of that show you watched back in 1990, you know? Yeah, it's beautiful.
So we find ourselves now at Dr. Jacoby's mad Rube Goldberg machine for spray painting shovels gold, which begs the question, who gives a fucking shit how long a spray painting scene is?
I don't have much to say about this scene, except for the fact, A, Lynch, fuck you. B, I remember at the time, because we lingered on this for so long, that it was going to have some importance.
Is it about the shovels?
No.
We go from golden shovels to
Silver Mustangs. Yeah, first appearance of the Silver Mustang Casino. The Silver Mustang, of course, makes us think of white horses. And they've been a thing in Twin Peaks. I mean, it doesn't prove anything. But if we go with the interpretation of this is all in some way in Cooper's subconscious or in some kind of pocket universe that could be part of, at least partly, Cooper's creation, then it makes sense that there's these references to previous events and to the spirit world of Twin Peaks that are emblazoning themselves on this landscape. Or you can just take it as it's Mark Frost and David Lynch just making references for the sake of making references.
Yep. Either way, we get some top slapstick as
sure do.
Doug Acup tries to fucking enter the casino.
Well, Jade drops him off, and this is where we get Jade on the ball, saying, yeah, you might have had a stroke, go see a doctor. Literally the first and last fucking time that anyone will suggest that very obvious remedy for Dougie's condition.
Not even his wife.
Because it seems like he's about to enter a realm of absolute fucking idiots.
Look, here's the thing.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
I 100% at the time, and still to this day, despite the possibility that this is a memory, a moment in time, a bubble, whatever's going on from here on in up until episode 18, I stand the shit out of Coop and Jade.
Yeah, no, same. Absolutely. Let's be real, I think Cooper also stands Jade. So we forgot to mention the immortal line Jade gives to Rice, which became such a meme. Yeah, so Jade eventually tells him, you can go out now, which of course brings us back to Laura Palmer's words back in part 1 or part 2, which again, again, it's open to interpretation whether that's just Mark Frost and David Lynch being Mark Frost and David Lynch by doing the endless repetition thing, or, is it more fuel to the fire that actually this is all kind of an illusion and these are just memories leaking in.
I think this is the latter because we literally see Laura Palmer saying that after it.
Which is very unusual for David Lynch to do, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like them to go, oh, remember this, but I think that gives substance to the idea that this is just based on a memory.
Yeah, I do remember the first time I saw this, I remember thinking to myself, it's very unusual for David Lynch to show something like that we've already... It's a very conventional way of making television, where you want to remind the viewer of a thing is to show them it again. David Lynch does not do that very often. So yeah. So Cooper has some difficulty with the revolving door.
To be fair,
same energy.
I've been there. Yeah. I know that I'm jumping ahead slightly again, but this is obvious for anyone who's a fan of David Lynch, but I felt like it bared repeating or saying, David Lynch loves weird, dirty people.
Yes.
Yeah, the slot machine lady, I guess is who you're referring to.
Lady.
Before that, we get the change lady, who has like 2 lines, and is played by the great Meg Foster.
She seems partially really concerned
Yes.
as well, but also partially like, get away
Aye.
from me. It's like,
Take this and go away.
Well, I know I made here is the possible interpretations of the word change, because everything has changed for him, and I just like the idea that on some metaphysical level, this is a point at which, had he been more on the ball, maybe he could have got something more out of this, but instead all he says is, game. And so change lady just gives him the change, and then, yeah, as you say, clasps her hand to her heart and looks a bit kind of, oh, what's going on with that guy?
The security guard was quite touched as well, wasn't he? Hey! Over there. In the back, pal.
Is all of this a metaphor for the way that the mentally ill and the homeless and stuff are treated in Western society in general nowadays? Are they doing a little bit of social commentary with
Probably,
the way people are
yeah.
reacting to Dougie
I think that's a good shout, and I think probably on certainly on Mark Frostbart, that's probably something that was on his mind.
David Lynch has never noticed these people, is that what you're thinking? These people look as if they're having a swell time!
These people just need some more transcendental meditation. He seems to believe that will solve everything. Quick note about the worst thing David Lynch has ever said. Apparently when he was at the GFT, that's the Glasgow Film Theatre to anyone not familiar, which is a small independent cinema in Glasgow. He appeared there some years ago.
With Donovan.
With Donovan, yeah.
Oh, really?
Which, by the way, side note, whenever I hear the name Donovan, I don't think of the folk singer Donovan. I think of Mark Singer from V.
Yes, same.
That's a good one. I think watching Hal Hartley movies, I think Mark Singer's Donovan from V is probably who I would have thought of as well. But yeah, somebody asked him some question about how he feels about world affairs or something, and tried to needle him on a position about Israel-Palestine, to which David Lynch apparently replied, the Israel-Palestine situation could be solved through transcendental meditation. And I'm like, yeah, this is why I don't really want to hear anything David Lynch says in real life.
Maybe this is not a good take, but this take's coming. So strap
Hot
in.
take?
Brace for impact.
Uh-oh. I need a bad take, Lex.
Hot take,
Yeah,
someone.
I think whoever asked that question of David Lynch got the fucking answer they deserve.
You know what? I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
Fucking yes or no Lemmy at the GFT going, David, actually, what do you think about Israel-Palestine?
No,
Like,
yes or no? Yes or no? You can't even answer yes or no.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think knowing David Lynch as I do, what he's like, the last thing I would ever do is ask him a political question of any nature. I think if you've heard any interviews with David Lynch, more than 2 or 3, you know that the man literally is a fucking child who lives in his own universe.
Yeah.
Don't ask him about world politics, for Christ's sake.
His own MO.
Especially when he's there with Martin Donovan and Mark Singer. Just trying to talk about transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
Remember Beastmaster? Hell of a movie!
The situation between the visitors and the earthlings could easily have been solved through transcendental meditation. Martin Donovan's character could easily have stood the quiet if only he'd practiced transcendental meditation.
That would have been a cool thing to happen.
Oh, you are on fire, mate. I'm here for it.
We get to drop in cool thing yet again. This will be the 3rd appearance in the
Copyright
podcast.
strike. You're welcome, Sonic Youth. Alright, we're getting off the rails here.
Yep, right. Yeah, so we get the full on... we get television's greatest visual effects
yes.
again.
Yeah, I made the note that this is like a video game RPG, where there's like an icon above something that can help you, you know?
This slot machine has a quest for me, kind of thing, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is another way in which I can sort of understand why some people feel that the iconography of the Red Room might have been cheapened a little bit. I said, okay, no, you've literally just made it a video game RPG icon. Fuck you, David Lynch. I can see why some people feel that way.
I just got really into Zelda that summer.
I never got to make woodcutters from fiery ships, so I just put it in my Twin Peaks.
It's strange because the guy's not even called Zelda. He's called Link.
Always preferred the patties, but breakfast sounds like a real good idea. I think we've definitely hit our David Lynch impersonation quota for this episode.
Or Skeletor in your case.
Oh, to be fair, Skeletor is literally the only impersonation I do well. Anyway, moving on.
I love this scene, like, for so many reasons. The first reason is I don't know why it's in here, right? But the second is it goes on for so long. I love the comedy of, we get like classic Twin Peaks style weird comedy of the staff
Yeah.
kind of running around trying to get after, like trying to find where Coop's at and just following the hellos
Yeah.
and like the sirens going off, like, oh, you're going to need a bigger bucket, and he just fucks off.
Yeah, and it's Sabrina Sutherland, who is the producer of Twin Peaks. She's the woman
That's
her,
Sabrina
yeah,
Sutherland. I did not know that. That's hilarious. We get, like, at first, Coop's getting the pure stink eye off of, like, the weird, dirty old woman.
I've just called her slot machine lady. Cooper actually attempts to point the slot machine lady to one of the slot machines with the icon. And she says, no! And gives him the finger. And then thinks about stealing his cash, and then gives the camera the finger, which is a great moment.
Yes.
And when the staff come round, she tells him, the nutcase left!
Yeah, and she overhears, I think it's in episode 4, them saying, oh, is it like 28 fucking
Mega
jackpots? And she was like,
maybe I'll give this a shot.
Give this a shot. But then we go,
yeah, scene transition to somewhere very important, very important, very important, very important, to quote Andy Brennan. Philadelphia, FBI headquarters. As soon as I saw that it was Philadelphia, I was like, oh shit, here comes Gordon Albert, because we've not seen him yet.
yep.
And again, it's one of those great... Lynch does a great job of making no fanfare about the reintroductions, you know? As soon as we get into that scene, it's like, you know, it's like it's halfway through the scene. Because there's a whole storyline that that we're just not privy to.
Yeah, the guy with he's buried these in his garden and says
if he tells us the identity of the killer, it will breach national security, so he gave us these clues instead. Like, what?
It's like two bikini photos, a jar of beans, and a machine gun. It's like David Lynch and Mark Frost are just taking the piss out themselves at that point. They're like, well, this is a pure Twin Peaks scenario.
That is like something from season 2.
Yeah, it's the jar of beans that killed
The Congressman's Dilemma. Yeah, such a joy, though, to see these two characters again together. The first, I mean, I squeed as soon as I saw them at this table. And Big Miguel Ferrer, who we have to remember at this point when we saw it, he had already passed. He died before this aired. So
is that right? I didn't realise that. Like,
yeah, he died a few months before it aired. So to see him on screen here was just, it was bittersweet. But seeing him back in this role, a real delight. And him and, oh my God, see, let's just take this as a whole for a second. He and Lynch together on screen, the chemistry is unbelievable. They are so good together.
Yep. In comedy or drama moments, they are brilliant together. There's that scene in the Blue Rose scene in part 4 where Albert's talking about when he told Philip Jeffries where to find their man in Colombia. But there's a moment where they're in silence, just staring at each other. And it's like, they don't need to do anything. They're just... And
actually, I mean, we are skipping ahead. We'll probably mention this again. But since you brought it up, one of the things I love about that scene is when Albert makes his confession of sorts. And then Gordon just goes, Albert. And then it's this pause where it's like, Albert. And you sort of see the thought process of, you did wrong, but I forgive you. You know... but he doesn't say it because it's all shorthand between these two characters. They just instantly know each other, what each other is thinking. The chemistry is just so good, and the writing just does just enough.
And we get our first introduction to Sammy Preston, who Alan rightfully likened last episode to a weird snake lady.
I mean, I can't even take the credit for that. That's my pal Kenny and his girlfriend Gaynor. Like, they're massive fans of Twin Peaks, so will probably listen to this, so shout out. But they like kind of mentioned that, like, when I was watching it with Craig, they said, we went to see Crypta Bell just not that long ago, and they kind of mentioned the David Lynch like makes her act like a weird snake lady, and it's like, yes, he does.
Or as Craig put it, act like it's your first day on Earth.
Yeah, I mean, there is a real alien aspect to Crypta Bell's performance here.
I found her in these 2 episodes far more palatable than I remember.
Yeah, I don't dislike her. I think we talked about this previous episode. I think I just had to go through a process of whatever expectations I had from reading Mark Frost's book and listening to the audiobook, I had to chuck out, because that's not what David Lynch was doing with the character.
See, there's where I've got a completely different perspective on this, because I just looked at her as being the perfect person to be that character for a David Lynch thing, because it was just kind of weird, but it worked.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it would not be the first time that David Lynch has cast someone who's not actually an actor in a prominent role. You know, he's got previews for this.
But also later on, as we found out in episode 4, Lynch and Frost do laugh at the idea of David Lynch casting someone young, attractive, young, attractive women, barely 30. It's like, I don't know if that was Lynch or Frost that wrote that, but I like the idea that Mark Frost's just like, you old pervert.
You think Lynch did not know what was going on there? He was just playing his character?
Yeah.
I'm old school, Denise, you know that. Tammy gives them the rundown of what happened in New York with Sam and Tracy. Thanks, Tracy. It's kind of funny the way in which this is just laced in here, that we know that Gordon and Albert know this happened, and yet it's never mentioned again up until the point where Tammy comes back and says, oh yeah, I've got another photo. Turns out Cooper was there. And it's like, I feel like if anybody else had written this would have been more of a thing. Like, Gordon and Albert would have went to New York, or maybe done a bit more investigating there, but it's just not mentioned again. It's like Tammy seems to be the only one who's keeping on top of it.
What the hell?
What the hell? That's another meme. One of my favourite memes that this spawned is the one where Tammy is not showing them slides from the murder scene, but is in fact showing them scenes from the James and Evelyn subplot from season 2. It's a scene where Evelyn says, I love you, James. I've never said that to anyone in my life before, but I love you. And that's when Lynch says, what the hell?
And this scene is full of classic Gordon Cole messaging jokes as well.
Yeah. And they're those jokes are so hammy and so cheap, but they never stop being funny.
I know he's your friend, but we can't rush this.
It's good you want to hurry. Yeah, I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, all right, okay, we are right back in classic Gordon Cole. This is great. Side note, by the way, to be fair, of course, Lynch was always great at this role because it was originally effectively just an exaggerated version of himself. I have to say, though, I do think he's become a really good actor. Like, in this season, he's really fucking good. Like, Gordon Cole does shit in this season that we didn't get to see Gordon do anything like this, anything that on this sort of level. We did not get to see him emote in anything like this sort of range. Lynch has actually become a pretty decent actor.
Oh, James, when you were saying about the Blue Rose scene, see the bit when he's like he turns up the hearing maids and whatnot, and it's just like the whole bit is just you're expecting more slapsticky kind of just over the top nonsense, and there is a little bit of that, but it's more kind of emotional or whatever. Like, I don't know where I'm trying to go with this. He's really fucking great in that whole scene.
And he does all this while also directing every episode.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So they get the phone call. It's about Cooper. And James, you will be like me. It was another jump out of my seat moment the first time I saw this. And of course, actually, I remember saying to you, James, one of the trailers that got released prior to this airing actually had that clip of Gordon grabbing Albert and going, Albert! Yeah. And we both said, I bet they've heard something about Cooper. And so to see that was really satisfying. But yes, the excitement of this part here was like, oh, Cole and Albert are going to go, they're going to meet evil Cooper. This is going to be crazy. Yep. I know I want to make here, that I have to make, about Gordon's office There's the obvious thing that he's got a big, massive mushroom cloud photo on his wall, and on the opposite wall, he has a portrait of Franz Kafka. And Kafka, of course, has a huge influence on David Lynch, and we did discuss this on our previous episode.
Kafkaesque.
So, as Jesse Pinkman would say, real Kafkaesque. It's really interesting to see. I mean, obviously, Lynch has, in interviews, he's always spoken about what an influence Kafka is on him as a storyteller. And reading between the lines, I've always felt that when Lynch says Kafka is his favourite writer, I think what he actually means is Kafka is one of the few writers he's ever read. I don't think David Lynch reads very much fiction. That's the kind of vibe I've always got from him. And so he's constantly, like, you go back 30 odd years of interviews with David Lynch and people ask him, who are your favourite novelists, who are your favourite writers? He always says Kafka, and that's it. He never mentions anybody else. And what's funny about that is that on the one hand, you can kind of see why the kind of stories that Kafka told really suit David Lynch's sensibility, in the sense that Kafka's stories often involve someone who finds themselves in a situation that they don't understand, but that everyone around them seems to understand, and that they're suddenly the fish out of water, and that everything suddenly seems very surreal, and the world that you thought was familiar seems very unfamiliar. All of that makes sense when you consider the work of David Lynch. But the other thing that's funny about it is, especially in the context of what we said earlier about David Lynch's comments about Israel-Palestine, for example, Kafka was a very political writer, and Kafka was an outspoken socialist, and all of his works have socialist context. I guarantee you, David Lynch has no idea about those contexts. And to people out there who might interpret that as me slagging off David Lynch, I'm not doing that. I just think David Lynch would be the first to admit that he just doesn't really think about these things, and so he doesn't really pick up on them.
David Lynch has made more art than he's consumed.
He's the cinematic Garth Marenghi. The mushroom cloud is an interesting one, because on the one level, what does it tell us about Gordon Cole? Because Gordon Cole is clearly someone who understands bureaucracy, has probably been frustrated by your bureaucracy. We know he's a bit of a maverick in the FBI, so it makes sense that he would relate to Kafka's work on that level. The mushroom cloud is a bit more of a perplexing one. Why does Gordon Cole have a picture of a mushroom cloud?
I think it goes back to David Lynch's whole kind of shtick, if you will, of 1950s, although that's the 40s, I know, but it's just that's the defining moment of a generation kind of thing.
I get that's the case for David Lynch, but the point I'm getting at is that there's two levels here. There's the level at which this is interesting for David Lynch, but what about Gordon Cole, the character? Why does he have a picture of the mushroom cloud on his wall?
He's also, a high-ranking member of a government agency who would probably support that action. Do you know what I mean?
I was kind of going to go down that line. That's kind of what I feel about it. But why would he commemorate the cloud is what I'm getting at. And I do feel that it might be more of a Frost thing. Who knows? Maybe this is something Frost put in the script. Maybe it's something they both put in the script. Or it could be something David Lynch decided when they were filming. We have no way of knowing, right? But I do kind of feel like, is this a literal thing where the show is saying, when we get to part 8, oh no, Gordon Cole has always known the connection? Is it that literal? Or is it that Gordon Cole, as well as just being supportive of the atomic bomb, could it be that he recognises there's something about the chaos of the atomic bomb that fascinates him? Obviously, Gordon Cole is a high-ranking member of a very tight organisation. And I think there's something quite interesting about the contrast between someone who is in that role and has to be very officious, but is fascinated with destruction and chaos and everything being torn down. And yes, it is a twofold thing. I think definitely that's where David Lynch finds a lot of joy in chaos as well. But I do feel like for a high-ranking officer whose whole days are spent probably quite often battling bureaucracy in different ways, he looks at this force of destruction and thinks, oh, just bring it on. I think there's that element of that just yearns for chaos and destruction, which, when you consider Gordon Cole's outward manner of being very affable and kind of folksy, I think there's a real hardcore American truth about that whole thing. And maybe and that's what makes me think maybe it is more of a Mark Frost thing. That maybe Mark Frost made that detail that, even the most folksy and affable seeming person who are embedded in the American military industrial complex to some degree, or the intelligence complex, they all have that part of them that's like, but why can't we just blow shit up?
Drop the bomb!
Yeah, what I was thinking is, we know for a fact, regardless of whether this is a dream, a memory, a moment in time, if we take this as literally as this is happening, we know that the first atomic bomb test was the birth of evil. And that evil here is represented by the FBI.
I like it, James. I like it.
Yes.
Certainly, yeah, I mean, per my own sensibility, I prefer that interpretation way more. Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, even though the timing is out, I do feel there's like, we've sort of talked about this before when we've talked about other things, about how the iconography of the 20th century is something a lot of artists use as the prism through which to explore all themes, because obviously it's the last great century in living memory. So much happened in the 20th century, like the spread of information really accelerated, and so the spread of technological progress really sped up in the 20th century. And it is one of those things that even within the 20th century there were a lot of people at the height of creative fields, at the height of industry, who were very aware that this was an era of acceleration, and who all felt that, to some degree, could this be leading to some great apocalyptic endpoint? And of course the nuclear bomb came to symbolise that feeling, that the destruction of the Second World War, if we were to repeat that on a bigger scale, that would surely mean the end of the world. And so there was a sense that the 20th century was either going to be the final century of human history, or it was going to be the birth of something more positive. It turned out not to be either, right?
I think a kind of little column A, little column B.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like on an aesthetic level there is a lot of that going on. I do feel that, well, I was going to say that's more of a Frost thing, but actually I think on an aesthetic level it is just as much a Lynch thing. I think it's just on the Frost level it is much more conscious. It's much more cerebral.
Another thing I think it might just be is a cool Easter egg. Like, here's a black and white photo of the bomb. You're going to see this.
Right, and that's the thing. It could just be something as frivolous as that, yeah.
David Lynch pissing himself like, they're going to be talking about this for hours.
But the fact it is so huge and it takes up one whole wall, it's like, what the fuck, man?
As vile as the nuclear tests were and the use of nuclear weapons is, I would 100% have that covering a wall because it's a fucking cool image.
It's cool, yeah. I think and incidentally, I was reminded recently from listening to one of the many podcasts I listened to. I was talking backwards, actually. They were watching Eraserhead, and it reminded me of a detail I'd forgotten. In Henry's apartment, he actually has a framed photograph of a mushroom cloud. So this is something that Lynch comes back to, It's clear, like you say, I mean, as a kid growing up in the 50s, it is one of those things that's in the back. It gets soaked into your subconscious. But yeah, it's interesting to note.
The nuclear explosion is the ultimate boomer.
Hey! This is why I'm proud to share a podcast with you.
So then we get our Roadhouse performance.
Oh, right. These, yeah.
I don't know who this is.
I forget the name of these guys who do it.
But what I've written down here is Milford and Sons.
Dougie, Milford and Sons. It's fine. It's fine. I don't love it. I don't
definitely
love
on David Lynch's street, right? Like,
I'm going to get this out of the way just now so that we don't end this podcast on a negative note when we get to the Roadhouse performance in part 4. So I'll just say it now. I know I did say this in our previous episode, but I'll just expand a little. I don't love most of the Roadhouse performances in the season.
Not even the Nine Inch Nails?
It's fine. The Nine Inch Nails is fine. It's okay, but I don't love it. And a lot of them, I'm just like, I could do without this. I think I'm fine with the ones that I feel fit aesthetically with the show. So even if it's not my bag, I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. This one, I don't. Does it fit with the aesthetic of the show? It is very, very southern country to my ear. So I don't know what it's doing here, really. Sure, I don't know. But there are certain acts at the Roadhouse that really piss me off. And I'm just going to get it out of the way now. Au revoir, Simone. It's the worst shit I've ever heard in my life. Just the most...
Craig's having a wee au revoir Simone about this.
Oh!
It is just the most banal, anemic, middle-class, indie-schmindy bullshit.
Do you know what it reminds me of? Do you know the two ladies that sing kind of comedy? Like, I think they've done an advert or something.
Garfunkel and Oates? Yeah. They are like Garfunkel and Oates, taking themselves seriously.
I don't know what that is. I'm going to have to look it up.
Are they called that? I thought you were just being silly there.
No, Garfunkel and Oates are, I can't remember the name of the comedians, but you'll recognise the comedians.
Okay.
But they have like a Flight of the Conchords-esque comedy duo they do, and their songs are pretty great. But Au revoir Simone are like one of their sketches.
Yeah. Right, aye. It's like the kind of thing that I would remember seeing playing at the art school or the Strathclyde Union back in the 90s. You know, like, I never want to hear their music ever again. And I know I said this last episode, but I want to say it again. The fact they appear twice is unforgivable. Unforgivable.
More like Au revoir Simone to fuck.
Yes, that. I hate this. I hate it so much.
I thought you'd have been right into it. I'm shocked to hear you say this.
I don't want this to be me being 100% negative. So while we're talking about the Roadhouse performances, let me just say, skipping ahead, Roadhouse performances I do enjoy. David Lynch's son's band, Trouble, I really like a lot. And I wish we got more of it. Like that dirty sax and kind of delay guitar thing. I'm all about that. Let's have more of that. Bit jazzy, bit dirty, bit groovy. I'm all about it. Oh, what is the fucking band that plays? Is it part 15? The one where we have Ruby crawling on the floor in the Roadhouse?
Yeah.
I quite like that band. I've never heard anything they've done outside of that one song, which I believe is called Axolotl. But I quite like it. It fits the aesthetic for me, and I think it's quite a good song. It's quite decent. I don't have any problems with it. There's just a few I'm just like, I don't need this. Let me put it this way, though. Au revoir Simone are so bad that they make, first of all, the chromatics seem great. And to me, I think the chromatics were all, in my radar, as being very bland, very middle of the road. But you put them next to Au revoir Simone are like a chromatics tribute band. You know, I don't want to go on about it. But but the other thing is, they also make Eddie Vedder seem palatable, and you know how much I dislike Eddie Vedder.
I really like Eddie Vedder's performance. I'm not going to lie. I think it fits. I think it's really good.
I don't even remember Eddie Vedder doing like one of the Roadhouse ones. Is this like?
It's because he's introduced by his actual name, because Eddie Vedder's just his stage name, but his name's Edward
Louis Severson.
Yeah, and he's got like a funny hat on and a beard.
Yeah, but this is in an episode coming up.
It's the scene where Audrey and Charlie shut up at the Roadhouse.
Looking for Billy Zane.
It's fine. I don't hate it. Alright, so that's my moaning about the fucking Roadhouse performance. Oh, actually, the other thing I just want to say quickly, I remember at the time when the return was airing, I actually made a photo album on Facebook called If the Twin Peaks Roadhouse Had a Much Better Booking Agent, and it was just photos of live performances from artists I really like. And so what I felt the Roadhouse could do with was a bit more jazz, a bit more R&B, some hip-hop here and there. This will surprise nobody who listens to this podcast. But that's what the Roadhouse needed.
Oh yeah, sure, put Nervosa on at the Roadhouse. Okay, we get it, Craig, fuck's sake.
I didn't mention metal, but sure, why not?
Okay. So, Part 4.
Part 4.
Brings back some memories.
Directed by David Lynch, written by Mark Frost. in case you've lost track.
We get that scene of Dougie meeting his quote-unquote pal, and the guy, him and his wife are both just like, is he okay?
Yeah.
Gee, I hope he's okay.
And it's this guy that lets Cooper know that his name is Dougie Jones.
Yeah.
And tells him where he lives.
Yes, Lancelot Court.
Red Door.
Lancelot Court, of course, an Arthurian reference, because Mark Frost is obsessed with Arthurian legends.
Glastonbury Grove.
The burial place of King Arthur. King Arthur's buried in England. Last I heard.
David Lynch is like, keep your Arthurian obsession out of my musical, you fucking idiot. And now, my friends, the chromatics. Yeah, I love the whole scene of like all of the casino guys trying to weirdly strong-arm Dougie, despite the fact that they're also giving him his winnings.
Yeah.
Is the guy who gives him his winnings? Is he that guy? Like the guy from Stranger Things?
Yes, Brett Gelman. He's a comedian. I knew him previously from being on a lot of comedy podcasts, and yeah, he does play that character in Stranger Things, god awful season 3.
You just eliminated the Stranger Things fans. They were going along with the
Au revoir Simone fans.
Yep.
Au revoir Stranger Things fans.
We are hemorrhaging listeners right now.
What else is new?
Better do a music episode next.
I know, mine is Au revoir Simone. You can pick whoever you like.
Yeah, I thought it was that guy because he always looks he looks slightly different in every role, but he's got that same energy and he's pretty fun. But I love the actual handover of the bag where they're both holding on to it. So
and
good.
Cooper copying him leaning in.
Yeah.
He looks up at the camera. Yeah.
What I especially love about this, though, this is the start of a trend where Cooper acts. This is what I mean earlier by the Mr. Magooing of it all. In the way that Mr. Magoo just completely, with no consciousness whatsoever, just evades bad luck and walks into good fortune. Cooper kind of does the same thing. Like, he has this echolalia where whatever someone says, he will repeat a part of it. And the parts that they choose for Cooper to repeat are often just ingenious. Because this scene where Brett Gelman's character says, "That's right, Mr. Jones, we're watching you day and night." And Cooper says, in a really sinister tone, "and night." It just comes across as a threat, and it's like, all right then.
Weird slot machine lady has a change of heart about Mr. Jackpots.
Yeah.
She thanks Mr.
Beautiful
Jackpots.
moment. Thank you, Mr. Jackpots.
As we'll see much later in the show, her life gets totally turned around by that moment, and it's beautiful. Like when he meets her again in the restaurant, it's just, aww.
And this is also the start of a trend of Cooper in his role as Dougie really improving the lives of people around him, which, you know, it's one of those things that I feel it does add a bit of a fuel to the theory that this is Cooper's own personal internal journey where he has to try and find himself again. And we can get into a larger, more complex conversation further down the line about whether the original Cooper really is the real Cooper. But certainly the original Cooper back in the day was very much an idealised sort of character. Like, he had very little darkness in him. And whatever darkness was there was kind of dealt with in a very cursory fashion. Whereas I feel like what The Return is doing is presenting us with Doppel Cooper as being the ultimate darkness of Cooper. I probably said this in the previous episode, but the coming together of he and Doppel Cooper results in the Richard at the end. So in a way, on the one hand, this is like a very cutesy way in which they're trying to make classic Cooper find himself again, but on the other hand is like a certain aspect of Cooper deceiving himself in the way that a lot of David Lynch protagonists from his movies do, a la Mulholland Drive, for example.
There was a moment in our previous episode where you talked about the whole occult thing about right and left and intuition.
Yeah.
And how when he becomes Richard, he's lost all of his intuition.
Right.
Watching this with that in mind, I feel like Dougie is Coop as pure intuition.
Yes, I agree.
Because there's no logical thought to anything he's doing, but it just works out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely on point. Because he has no, there's no conscious level Cooper here whatsoever. It's just purely the drifting from one instinct to another. I think it is absolutely that. It's that sort of what made Cooper such a great detective in the original series.
Yep, and through that, he's able to enrich and better the lives of those he meets.
Yep.
Whereas, like you say, when he loses that intuition, he's just an idiot. He's like more idiotic than Dougie at that point.
Yeah. I mean, this has opened the floodgates to a more complex conversation that we're probably best having further down the line. But it does make me think that we'd probably have to think hard between now and when we have that conversation about what it is exactly that makes that part of Cooper so muted when he and Doppel Cooper kind of come together as one, if that's the interpretation you're going with, like in part 18, if that's the way you interpret it. I mean, that is pretty much the way I interpret it. That's kind of always been my interpretation, that Richard represents some kind of amalgam of Doppel Cooper and classic Cooper, and that on some level we're sort of being told that classic Cooper was always an ideal and therefore couldn't possibly be 100% real. But nonetheless, this wholesome, intuitive part of him is definitely a real part of him. But what is it that happens between now and that end point that makes that part of him so muted towards the end? I think that's something we'll have to think about when we get to that point.
Well, see, you were saying before about how this is all just happening in a single moment, and it's like just in Coop's head or Richard's head or whoever's head. If you are like making up something or remembering it from your point of view and you have control of what's happening, you're going to have the most idealised version of yourself, probably, right? Unless you're a basket case like some of us. But most people are going to have them as the force for good, the force for change in that regard, so like, maybe that's why. But when you're saying about how...
I like to remember things my own way,
I was
Fred
going to say
Madison
that,
style.
yeah, that is a classic line from Lost Highway that Bill Pullman's character says, I like to remember things my own way. And I do feel like that is a useful key for looking at a lot of Lynch's work when it comes to this kind of characterization. One other just quick note about this, something I'll probably signpost from time to time as we go ahead. I do feel like, to some extent, Cooper is a bit of a narcissist. He has to be, because the decision he takes at the end of the return to try and save Laura in the way that he goes about it, only a narcissist would do that. And I do have reasons for that, but we don't have time to go into it just now. And I do think it is a narcissist trait that you do see your idealised self when you're thinking about these things, and you don't see... You know, narcissists generally think very highly of themselves, and so therefore they don't see the flaws in that plan. They only see the good that they try to do. And I think this is what upsets a lot of classic Twin Peaks fans who dislike the return, is that on some level, even if they didn't recognise it consciously, on subconscious level, the return was telling them that, no, that original recipe Cooper that you liked was not what he seemed. And that upsets a lot of people.
That Coop you don't like is going to come back in style.
He's not coming back in style.
So, Doug A is all like, cab home, and Stranger Things guy, whose name I have forgotten, even though you literally just said it.
I don't remember his character's name. Brett Gelman is the actor / comedian in the role.
Gelman offers him a limo, so Doug A rides home in style, a style befitting Mr. Jackpot's.
Mr. Jackpot's. I just remembered where the casino boss, like where I've seen him from, because I didn't see Stranger Things season 3, but he was the alky husband of the main character's sister in Fleabag.
Yes!
Yes, that's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
It just came back to me there.
So, after much driving around, Dougie finds his home. The limo driver takes him out and then just stands with him.
It's so funny.
I really enjoy the limo driver's energy here.
Yeah.
Where he just says, alright, I'll wait. And we get that great shot of an owl flying overhead. And the limo driver saying, oh, those things spook me.
And David and Mark wink.
It is literally the only owl we get in the entirety of the return.
Oh, yeah.
Just fucking with us.
You guys remember owls, eh?
Yeah, there's your owl. There you go, you can shut up now about
There'll
owls.
be some coffee in a bit. There's going to be cherry pie later. You'll get your stuff from the original series, fine. And then Naomi Watts bursts through the door like a hurricane.
Rock you like a Naomi Watts.
I love Naomi Watts as Janie E. I think she's brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, confession time here. When I first saw this, I did not love this. I did not love Naomi Watts in this role. I think she's great now, but the first couple of episodes with her in this role, I was not loving it. I didn't hate it, but it felt very arch. But you know what helped it? I think in the ensuing couple of episodes, I think the real turning point for me was when she goes and meets up with those the two moneylenders in the park. And she has that speech about we are the 99%. We drive miserable cars, and I was like, all right, okay, no, there is more to this character. I kind of see why she is so kind of highly strung.
She's married to Doogie, fuck's sake.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, nobody can blame her for being pissed off. Certainly. I mean, David Lynch is no stranger to a heightened performance, as we have noted.
No, wait, what?
But for whatever reason, this did not instantly chime with me. I was a bit, I don't know about this. But once I got into the swing of it, it was fine. And now when I rewatch it, I'm like, oh no, it's fine. It's all good. Naomi Watts knows what she's doing in this role. It's all good.
Yeah. I love her change. She goes from being pure raging to being like, did you get a haircut? Oh, where'd you get this suit? And it's this sort of like, she's angry, but she's like, basically like, damn, Dougie, you look good.
Yeah. This is the first hint that, this is the best Dougie has looked in quite a while.
The thirst is real.
But I love when she's like, this is the best day of my life. Dougie just goes, of my life.
Of my life.
She fixes him a sandwich and some of Sonny Jim's chocolate cake. Who the fuck came up with these names, though, right?
Oh,
Who was
Sonny
like,
Jim.
Right,
Do you know what?
this is classic David Lynch,
Yep.
though, isn't it? This is like the kind of names that would appear in Dumbland.
Yep, Janie E and Sonny Jim.
What was Michael Cera's character called again?
Wally Brando. I wonder if David Lynch is pure pissing himself when he's coming up with this stuff. If him and Mark Frost are just like in tears going, oh, Sonny fucking Jim. Outstanding.
My favourite part of this scene, though, is when Janie E says, "You missed Sonny Jim's birthday party that we've been planning for 6 months." Who the fuck in the world spends 6 months planning a child's birthday? That's not a thing.
Out with David Lynch's head? Nobody.
Oh, out with Klaxon.
That's one for our international listeners there.
We have a Klaxon for out with because it's a peculiarly Scottish word.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Can we take a moment to savour this moment here where Alan is learning? Okay, so full disclosure, Alan, we've talked about this on the podcast before. I forget which episode, where we both talked about experiences where we learned out with was a peculiarly Scottish word, and it's not used anywhere else.
Ah, Jings.
You will not hear it in England or Wales or Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland or any other English-speaking country in the world. Out with is as Scottish as shortbread and iron brew.
Nice.
Yep. To be fair, I only found this out quite recently as well, like maybe in the last couple of years.
I was today years old, obviously.
I've known it for a long time, but it is still one of those things that every time it comes up, I'm like, yeah, it's mad. Like, what other word would you use?
Yeah.
Out with the word out with.
Alright, so out with that, Alan, you were saying.
I don't remember.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, but no, you were saying that aside from David Lynch, no one else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, plans a birthday party for an 8-year-old kid.
Which
or
makes me
whatever.
wonder if he planned his kid's birthday parties 6 months in advance.
No fucking way.
Doesn't seem the sort.
He was not involved in the raising of those kids whatsoever, right?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. Are you fucking kidding me? How many kids does he have?
He was
by this
making
point?
films and they were being raised by their mother.
He's in the shed making statues out of cheese and shit, and like,
Yeah, dumping loads of soil on top of a table and then getting really excited 6 months later when he tells his wife, "Look, the soil has eaten right through the wood of the table." And his wife's standing there going, "What the fuck?"
his wife's standing there going, "You missed Jennifer's graduation."
Which we've been planning for 6 months.
Just so angry she's written boxing Helena.
Disclaimer, I don't want to cast any aspersions on Lynch's ability as a father. I'm just saying, he's an eccentric fella.
Yeah. Maybe Mark Frost spent 6 months planning his kids' birthday parties, who knows?
Yeah.
Spreadsheets, pie charts, the lot.
He could have spent that 6 months researching his own show from 30 years ago before he wrote that book.
Oh, it's a deep burn. Oh, it's so deep.
A note I really like here that I made is the way that Cooper keeps using the word home. It's one of the few words that he repeats where he has a different intonation on the word than the person who says it. Every time he says the word, it's like there is a yearning in the word home. And then when he actually gets home and Janie E tells him, "I'm glad you're home," and then he repeats the word, he seems satisfied. It's a subtle thing, but it's quite nice. I do feel like this is one of those moments where the show is saying, "So you know how you wanted classic Cooper to go out and do adventures and shit? No, that's not happening. This Cooper is now just going to stay home if he can. And any adventures that happen forthwith are incidental."
Cooper is the new Harold. And then we get to see the return of David Duchovny.
Yes.
This is a great scene. This is literally the first time we've ever seen David Lynch and Duchovny together on screen, and it's a treat. I squeed so hard the first time I saw this.
Man, Duchovny in this scene is he's owning it. He is powerhouse as Denise.
Yeah, he's great, and it's another example of what I was saying earlier about one of the classic characters being picked up by the actor 25 years later and really imbuing it with that sense of 25 years having passed for the character. There's so much weight behind every single line of dialogue that David Duchovny utters here. Like, even just the mannerisms and stuff, it's so on point. It's like 100% believable that it's that same character, you know. and who knows what kind of experience she's had in the last 25 years. But you really feel the weight of it.
Yeah, she loves saying Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yes, hashtag X-Files.
Before we get that, though, we get another one of those beautiful little cutting in halfway through a conversation moments.
Yeah. Did they ever fix that with the Bill?
Oh yeah, with Bill, who's played by Richard Chamberlain, who was a big star back in the 80s.
I recognised the face, but I did not put that together. Right?
Star of the Thornbirds back in the day.
Oh, that's where I know him from. I've got the Thornbirds on DVD. I say I've got it. Sarah's got it.
Do you remember how controversial that was back in the 80s? You might be a bit young, actually. I think it was like early 80s.
I don't remember it.
I remember my mum and that watching it.
It's just, I love that conversation where they're just like, oh, did Martha ever fix that thing with Paul?
Oh, Paul's now in the North Pole.
There you go.
Well, there you go.
What is Richard Chamberlain's role? Like, his character, what is his role?
I don't know.
He seems like he's like Denise's butler or something more than...
I know, like, what is this? What is this job description?
Major Bomo or whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, Denise is just so good here. And Denise, like we mentioned earlier in the episode, Denise has Gordon Cole / David Lynch's number. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're taking Tammy Preston with you. All right. Seems
Really,
like
Gordon?
Yeah. Gordon does a bit of a, oh, but what about?
What you getting at, Denise?
When he does the what about though, like the line he says, I don't remember it exactly. I just remember quite enjoying it. It's like if was it something about the Jokers like fix their
Those clown comics.
Yeah. Fix their dark hearts or die or
fix your hearts or die.
Yeah, I really like that line. But obviously it's
I love that.
said in a fucking like kind of, well, I did this for you. Like,
But I love it because it shows the kind of that wholesomeness of Gordon Cole, where he's just like, you know what, Gordon Cole, trans lives matter, fucking yes.
Yes.
We're here for it.
Cynical real life me is about to say hashtag intersectional imperialism.
Give it a rest for 1 minute, Craig. We're trying to enjoy something nice here with the FBI.
We're trying to enjoy something wholesome about the terrorist organisation, the FBI.
We stan a woke, trans-loving Gordon Cole.
To listeners who've only just joined us for our Twin Peaks chat and didn't listen to any of our previous stuff, maybe now is the time for the disclaimer. We discuss things from an explicitly left-wing perspective.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
It's not by design. It just happened.
Yep, we're not your grandmother's centrist podcast. We do apologise.
We're good people on both sides.
But my favourite thing about this whole scene, it's not even Denise calling Gordon out for being a bit of an old perv. It's not Gordon supporting trans rights. It's when Gordon leaves and David Duchovny just does that little fanning herself, like,
yeah.
Like, I'm 100% sure that was ad-lib. That just looks like it.
I think so as well, yeah.
There's that, and there's when Gordon tells Denise that Cooper's alive, and like Denise does the sort of stumble and grabs the chair.
Yeah, I really like that moment. Yeah, I really like that moment. Duchovny is doing so much in this very, very short scene.
Yeah, that's
doing enough to really enrich the life of this character that all us fans of the original series have loved for so long and probably had, head canons about what she'd been doing since. And to see her in this powerful role, I mean, hashtag intersectional imperialism, but it is kind of cool. It's kind of cool that she's that fleshed out and that powerful. And that she's the one with the power in that room is kind of cool.
Denise and her balls of steel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apart from the raging hormones.
Not the first trans person to run the FBI, though, right?
This is true. J. Edgar.
Oh shit! Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which I didn't realise until just this second. I was like, oh wait a minute.
Yeah.
So there's your intersectional imperialism.
Actually, come to think of it, that's probably something that Mark Frost had in his mind when he was writing this.
But whenever I hear about J. Edgar Hoover, it always just reminds me of the movie Clue.
But is the FBI in the habit of cleaning up after multiple murder? Yes. Why do you think it's run by a man called Hoover?
The other thing I always think of is Sheriff Cable and Firewalk With Me. They told me about a J. Edgar coming up here. I think I said, so what?
After Denise fans herself in a hilarious manner, that's not the last temperature chat we're going to have, because immediately we get Lucy confused about the thermostat.
About the thermostat, yeah, and that's not all she's confused about. Before we get to the how great it is to see Robert Forster. Love that guy, one of my
Yeah.
all-time favourite actors. Before we get to that,
I'm like 99% certain he's the guy.
as a hip reference to the Breaking Bad movie El Camino. Let's try and parse some of what is going on with Lucy here. I, earlier this week, in fact, was listening to an episode of the podcast In Our House Now, which is hosted by JB Minton and John Thorne. John Thorne, previously of Wrapped in Plastic magazine. I recommend it, actually. It's a decent podcast. They approach the return episode by episode by theme. So they choose a theme and then look at the entirety of the return through that theme. Some of it is really good. But their most recent episode, they were talking about the theme of observers. And Lucy was one of their chosen observers. And that is to say, one of the characters who does not necessarily have a proactive role in the story, but who, as the title suggests, observes what is going on. Although they both admitted that Lucy kind of breaks the barrier by she does end up being very proactive towards the end of the show. But they actually made mention of something that had been on my mind regards Lucy in the return, which is that she seems to be almost slightly out of sync with space and time, and that explains why she cannot understand cell phones. I will add in my own thing here that it's worth noting, I think, that this thing with Lucy not understanding how cell phones work is also in some way a riff on or continuation of a deleted scene from Fire Walk With Me. You probably know the one I mean, James. It's when Sheriff Truman and Andy are down in the interrogation rooms, and Sheriff Truman gets called away to go and see Josie, and then Andy leaves the cell, and Lucy doesn't understand why she's not getting a response from Andy, and then they both bump into each other comically in the corridor, and it's like Lucy has no conception of the time that's passed, that should signify that Andy has left the room. So they made some mention of this, and they kind of tied it to some quantum physics concepts, which I'm not going to get to. We don't have time for that, but it's worth listening to. And it is one of those things that I've always thought about Lucy. Certainly, after watching The Return the first time, when I started going, well, my obsessions, James, with this, that whole side of quantum physics. So certainly by the time Part 8 came along, that is something that was very much at the forefront of my consciousness. And so I do sort of feel like, as much as Lynch is playing this for laughs, Lucy's whole inability to understand how a fucking cell phone works, even though cell phones have been a thing for the better part of 30 years now, or 25 years, I think there is, on a narrative level, the suggestion that Lucy is tuned into some other kind of quantum frequency that the other characters are just not perceiving. I know there is that joke in part 17 where she says, I understand how cell phones work now, whereas I think the joke is she actually doesn't understand how cell phones work. But nonetheless, I think there is this sense where she's attuned to something that's happening. Again, this is if you go to my simultaneous moment theory, for example. I do feel like Lucy's a good example of a character who is sensing that something is not quite linear in the kind of time-space continuum. And she's one of the few characters that's recognizing that. And that her whole upset about not understanding cell phones is really just a side effect of that. I could get into more detail about this. All I'll say is listen to the episode called Observers on In Our House Now podcast. They do mention it a little bit. We have to talk about Robert Forster, because Robert Forster walks in, and I think with a lot of Twin Peaks fans, and I'm myself included, even though by this point, by the time we saw it, we knew Michael Onkeen wasn't involved anymore, there was still that sense of, but I kind of want Harry back. But see, when Frank Truman walks in that door and Robert Forster utters his first couple of lines, which I believe are along the lines of, I was out in the park a lot, signal cut out, couldn't stay out there all night. I like, yeah, I know you fit in this world so well, man. You're a natural fit. Robert Forster is great, and it's sad to me that he didn't work with David Lynch more often. Like, he had that very short scene in Mulholland Drive. There was more stuff shot for the Mulholland Drive TV pilot version. But yeah, it's sad to me they didn't work together more often. He's a perfect fit. He's got that gravitas and that sort of just enough of a real world salt of the earth man, but he can do this. He can react perfectly against the surreal, And we see that with the Wally Brando stuff later. So yeah, so just a thrill to see him here interacting with these classic characters.
He is a great actor.
Yes.
He's one of my favourite things about Jackie Brown, for example.
Yep.
Yeah, he is great in that movie. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
But we get Silver Fox Bobby Briggs. What a guy.
Back teeth were floating.
I love that that's his first line back.
I really love the respect that Lynch gave to this character reveal. I don't know about you, but the first time I saw it, as soon as you saw him down the hall, I was like, oh, that's Bobby Briggs. But because of the new design of the Sheriff's Department jackets, I did not immediately recognise he was wearing a deputy's jacket.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what's Bobby doing here? And then he turns around, and I'm like, oh, shit!
Do you know what? I wish there's only one thing I think would have been better about this reveal scene, and that would have been if a real indication was playing.
And he's dancing backwards. He's so good in this role. I really believe that this is dickhead Bobby Briggs grown up. This makes sense to me, that he turned his life around, albeit, putting my own misgivings about cops aside. It makes sense that character chose this.
Especially after the chat with his dad.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Yes.
In the original series. His military dad, Craig.
Yep. Put all the caveats in. I think the listeners are used to it now. Yeah.
And this show about FBI agents in the military that we love so much.
Propaganda.
This is, as a left winger, this is something you have to get used to with engaging with just about any narrative media. It is what it is. We have that scene where Frank walks in to what I call the real police work.
Yeah. It's like an actual police station at that point.
And what I think's really interesting about this is that this is juxtaposed with the scene with Lucy where she doesn't understand cell phones. And Frank immediately walks from there into this room where, here's a bunch of people doing actual police work.
Dispatch and whatnot.
You kind of get the sense that, they've kept Lucy on because they know she wouldn't be able to do anything else.
Yeah. She's part of the furniture.
You're right, she's been here so long, it's like, we'll just keep her.
Yeah.
And it's like, her job must now be so diminished, because the majority of calls now are going to the dispatcher, Maggie. I like the inference here that the Sheriff's Department have designed this in such a way that they've kept all the real police station out of Lucy's sight. I just think there's something kind of cool about that. Like, even though Lucy's aware of it, she doesn't have to look at it. She doesn't have to get upset about it. She feels she's still in control, I just think that's a really nice touch.
I also love, though, that all the quote-unquote new cops are in that room, and all the classic cops are in the conference room.
Yes, that's also true. Like, the conference room is the harem, if you like, where all the classic characters who know what shit is about come together, and they can get down to the real business. And Chad, who's there for like 5 minutes, is kind of dismissed on one account of just being an arsehole, but on the other account of just being, you don't belong here. This is for us old guard kind of thing. You belong through there in the modern police station.
Chad's going to go and have a chat with his pine cone.
I will say, though, like, the attention to detail in the characterization of these new characters, we see very little of these characters, but Lynch does a great job of establishing what the relationships are in that room. We see a little more of it later, like we see in a few episodes' time, we see Maggie get very exasperated with Chad, but we know instantly that Maggie is someone who's on top of her job, in a way that Lucy is not. In the same way that we know Chad is instantly a fucking arsehole within the first few lines of what he says. Because the first few lines of what he says is he instantly takes credit for something. Like, he interrupts Maggie to say, I got that one. It's like, all right, Chad, shut up.
Yeah.
Nobody cares, man. And then you've got weirdo Deputy Jesse, who is actually one of my favourite characters this season, just because I feel like he is... he's sort of like the Jack Nance of the Return, in the sense that he reminds me of Jack Nance's character in Blue Velvet, who's only really there to say perplexing things that have no context to the rest of the scene, which I quite enjoy. I like that they decided to add that. But there's a whole chemistry there that's very detailed, and it's given to us really, really quickly. And I think what I enjoy about that, It's a real spit in the eye of people who say David Lynch can't do proper storytelling and he can't do proper narrative filmmaking. He's all about just being weird and silly. Here he is, just creating this scene where you instantly know in a very short space of time what each of these characters' place is, and he does it very economically. And it was something that was I was very conscious of when I was watching it this time round.
I'm a big fan, though, of the first time we hear Laura Palmer's theme. Is that moment when Bobby comes in and sees the picture.
Yeah.
And has that like crying moment, which would seem ridiculous in most other shows, but fits so perfectly in that scene. Laura Palmer? It's almost like he's forgotten about her.
Right,
So
or
weird.
tried to forget about her, yeah. I think what makes that scene work so well is that the run-up to it is Chad being a dick.
Yeah.
So it's a real atmosphere change as soon as Bobby enters the room. Because Chad is just being an arsehole about the log lady, saying, "Oh, I'll go talk to my pine cone. Oh, Pinocchio's friend." Like, just fuck off, Chad. And that also works on a meta level because the fans love the log lady.
Yeah.
So it's like we instantly hate Chad because he's saying this shit about the log lady. Fuck you, man. It's like you were in fucking nappies when the log lady was taking Cooper at the roadhouse, saying there were owls there. Fuck you, man.
You don't know Chad.
Bobby Legacy's on in and just soothes everything with his very presence. It's that feeling of like it feels like you're home. It's that warmth of like, oh,
really does. And like I said, all these scenes in the conference room with these classic characters, it makes me so happy. Like just that sense of these characters having lived in this this old town that I used to love back in the day. It's just so great.
Like we were talking about earlier, he also adds that thing of like he enriches the original series when he hears them talking about Cooper, and he's like, Cooper was the last person to see my dad alive.
Yeah, which is a new detail.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, right, yeah. And you hear this stuff that happened. I think it works out like it's like a week or something after the show ended, and it's like the little details that get sprinkled in. You're like, ooh.
Yes,
So
yeah.
good. And there was a fire at his station, and like, oh.
Right, yes. And so your mind is instantly trying to fill in all those blanks, like, oh, Doppel Cooper must have killed Major Briggs and set fire to the station. And
because fire is the devil hiding like a coward in the smoke.
Oh, look at you, your log lady quotes. Love it, love to see it. Beautiful little touch I love in this scene is when Bobby is crying, you see Lucy reach her hand into Andy's to reassure him, because we know that Andy classically is the one who cries.
Yep.
It's beautiful. I love that so much. I also love Hawk in this scene. He doesn't have a lot of lines in this scene, but Michael Horsey's performance, when Bobby says what he says about Cooper being the last person to see his dad alive, Michael Horsey's delivery of "what's that?" it has that sense of, oh fuck no, I should have been on top of this years ago. Michael Horse does not get enough credit. His performance is so full of nuances.
And he'll tomahawk a motherfucker, like, no problem.
Yeah.
Which is what you want, right?
But then Jesse leans in the door in a weird way.
What is Jesse doing? It's like he stands there for about 30 seconds, like quiet, with this weird posture, and everybody's staring at him. It's like, what is it, man?
He is like the most Lynch character, I think, in the entire show. I don't know who the actor is, but the actor is brilliant. And he should be in everything, just popping in and going,
He's got kind of a Simpsons vibe, like it's a Simpsons character just leaning a door. Like, yeah, it's just so off the wall. So yeah, he alerts us that Wally Brando has arrived. To which Frank Truman says, oh boy.
I wanted to pay my respects to my godfather.
So this is another great legacy moment for us long-time fans, because we get to see the offspring of Auntie and Lucy.
And of course it's Michael Cera.
Whose conception was such a big plot point in season 2 of the original show. Yeah. And yeah, of course, I mean, it's pinpoint cast, and it's so great. And Michael Cera does such a stellar job with these monologues that he has.
Where have you been? I've crisscrossed this great country of ours, the map of which I hold within my heart.
I had to come to... Said he's come back to tell his parents that they could turn his childhood bedroom into a study.
And that's literally all he came back for. It's like, alright, could you not have phoned? Never heard of a phone, Wally. I often think of Lewis and his friend Clark, the first Caucasians to see this part of the world. It's absolutely brilliant. The delivery is so good. First time I saw this scene, I missed about 50% of it because I was laughing so hard. I was like, holy shit, man, this is so great.
Do you remember reading the cast list and wondering who the fuck is Michael Cera going to be?
Yeah, I seem to recall we both theorised that Michael Cera would be this character.
Yeah, and we were right,
Yeah.
but we had no idea how right we were and how good he was going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I certainly had no idea. I could not have possibly anticipated the Marlon Brando of it all, the wild one pastiche. That is not something I could have anticipated. But holy shit, Michael Cera's performance is amazing, man. It's incredible. It is pitch perfect.
Everything he says and every line is gold. My favourite is when Sheriff Truman says, "May the road rise up to meet your wheels," and he says, "That's a lovely turn of phrase."
Oh, heavens. Oh, my parents, these fine people. Yeah, the delivery's incredible. And if you watch Marlon Brando in the Wild One, you can see just how much he's channeling.
Yeah, it's spot
and
on.
impersonation to that, it's incredible.
How weird are you, Wally? How weird you got?
We mentioned earlier the line, but every time I see it, it's just a delight where he says, "My dharma is the road, your dharma," and then it's just a gesture.
Gestures broadly.
Give that man an Emmy just for that alone.
But Sheriff Truman's reaction to the whole thing as well, just absolutely perfect. He's just like, oh my fucking god.
Robert, see, this is why I love Robert Forster. He can be the straight man in the most absurd situation, and faced with this guy who's like a fucking cartoon character, he's just standing there with a straight face that somehow still, even though it's straight, even though it's static, he is still conveying the frustration of, I need to get out of this situation. Oh, God bless everybody in this scene. It's absolutely superb.
It must have been so difficult directing this, like, not to be absolutely buckled laughing, because like so much of Twin Peaks and so much of David Lynch's work is so dark and so like so cerebral that you forget that when you hear him talking about it, he pisses himself laughing on set and stuff all the time.
Yeah,
and like there's that story of when he was hearing Angelo Badalamenti rapping on A Real Indication that he laughed so hard he had a hernia. And so I can only imagine David Lynch being like, "Okay, action," and then just losing it.
I did read that Michael Cera did that speech only twice, and I believe they used the majority of what they used was from the first take. I remember reading that, and David Lynch said, "No, he did it perfectly the first time. We only did the second one for safety, you know."
Yeah.
But apparently after the first take, it was like, that was perfect. Let's do it one more time.
Then we head back on over to Las Vegas for morning coop.
And he's Frank Drebin P.
Yeah.
And his head tie.
And his lame jacket.
You may find yourself living in Las Vegas. Well, how did I get here?
I have an interesting note about this scene and indeed other scenes going forward. So, James, you might know this, that a couple of years ago, Kyle MacLachlan in interviews intimated that in the original script for The Return, Classic Cooper had been more present in the script than he was in the finished version. And I only recently heard, I think it might have been on the Twin Peaks Unwrapped podcast in one of its final episodes, actually, they had an interview with Kyle MacLachlan. He went into a little more detail about this, and apparently in this scene here and similar scenes going forward where Mike appears to Cooper in the script, and indeed apparently they actually shot this, Cooper becomes way more aware when Mike appears and actually talks to him as Classic Cooper. And they actually shot all of that, and that happens every single time that Mike talks to Cooper.
Damn.
So apparently somewhere in the editing, Lynch just decided, no. And I can kind of see the sense of it.
Yeah.
I can kind of see the sense of it. Like, it does break the flow, I suppose, and the sense of Cooper being kind of lost at sea if you have these moments of it where he's suddenly, very aware. But at the same time, I really want to see those deleted scenes.
Yep. I want to see I want more classic Coop.
Lime green jacket.
I really want to see what Kyle MacLachlan did in those moments. Like, what was the dialogue between him and Mike? I really want to know what that was.
I think just maybe I've given more clue to or more credence to certain theories, and David Lynch wanted to just vague it up a bit, so it was like, nah.
I think that's quite a likelihood, yeah. I think that's a good call, yeah. Could be that. And maybe that's why in the every home release of The Return so far, there are no deleted scenes. We get behind the scenes stuff, but we don't have any deleted scenes. We don't have any deleted footage.
We'll get the deleted footage in another 15 years.
We need to start that campaign. Yeah. So Lynch clearly has been very conscious of saying, no, don't. I'm not showing that to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't want that to colour people's interpretation or how they receive The Return. So I do think that is a possibility, that maybe there was more in there that maybe swayed a bit more to a certain interpretation. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think we'll ever know. But it's really intriguing that footage exists.
Damn, now I want to see it. Mike tells him that one of you must die, which we know, thanks to Lucy, will happen.
Yeah, or another way of interpreting it is, if you go with the theory that Richard is the amalgam of classic Coop and Doppelcoop, that in fact at least part of classic Coop dies.
Yeah.
It could be read that way as well. Yeah, there's so many ways to interpret this stuff.
Give you a migraine thing with this stuff.
It would, yeah. I mean, there's definitely so many ways. There's so much vagueness around so much of it that you can. It's certainly open for you to interpret it.
Do you know what though? I know we're like miles and miles from this episode, but every time I see Doppelcoop burning like that, I can't help but hear the Alice in Chains song "Angry Chair."
Sitting in an angry chair. Drop that one in there.
Yes, get some Alice in Chains into the playlist. It was at this point, actually, what I was mentioning earlier, that I knew that we weren't going to get Coop back for ages. That was when this time around it clicked. It was like, of course we're not.
Same, yeah. Although in our talk about in our Tron chat, not the Hamilton, the other one, when we would meet up regularly during the airing of The Return, I don't think either of us ever said this out loud. Because I think maybe we were both on some level hoping that maybe Classic Cooper would come back at some point.
I figured at like the halfway point.
I think we both maybe thought that, yeah. But I remember at that point, but I agree, in this scene, I do remember on some level think to myself, you might not get Classic Cooper back here, it might not be happening.
Do you know, it's like, not to bring Mr. Robot into everything on a Mr. Robot based podcast, but this time watching through it is like when you rewatch Mr. Robot and everything's super obvious.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, of course, why didn't I see that? That's obvious. This time around, it's like, fucking, of course, we're not going to get Coop back for most of this series.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we get the weird little interactions between Coop and Sonny Jim. The thumbs ups. I kept expecting Sonny Jim to turn into an old porter.
Yeah, there is that. There definitely is that energy, right?
I've heard
about you. Yeah, Sonny Drool Cup.
Another great Albertism. Oh god, there's such a good Albertism later.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, also Janie E's choice of words here when she comes up and tries to get quote-unquote Dougie organised, she says, "Alright, Mr. Dreamweaver." Which, you know, why that choice of words?
Yep. Very pointed.
I see what you're doing, Lynch and Frost. And I see, I mean I don't.
Yep. But I love that he just comes down with the tie in his head.
Yes.
Sonny Jim essentially teaching him how to eat breakfast. Which is kind of a beautiful thing all on its own. And it is one of the more wholesome sides of David Lynch. Like, he does like to have these moments every now and then where it's like, everything in this scene is just pure. There's nothing arch about this. This is actually just a pure scene of someone saying to another person, that's not how you do that. This is how you do it. Let me show you how to be a person. Even though Sonny Jim does not necessarily recognise that's what's happening, he might think his dad is just being a dick, right? Because what we know about Dougie and what we come to know about him is that he apparently has quote-unquote episodes, right?
Yep.
So, you know, this may have happened before. So Sonny Jim may not understand the context. But yeah, there is just something very pure and warm about it. I think we definitely had the conversation, James, back in the day when Cooper takes that swig of coffee and then says, "Hey!" They were like, "Oh, he's back."
Yeah.
No.
If only it was that simple. If only coffee brought him back. But Dougie Jones's reaction to coffee was my Facebook profile picture for fucking ever.
That's right. But it's interesting that he knows instantly what coffee is.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as it's poured, he's like, "Oh, that rings a bell." You know, it's these little touches. It's like, "Oh, you're just fucking teasing us, goddammit."
Hey, why don't we take a swing round to South Dakota? It's a very quick swing.
It's very, very brief.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get the great Jane Addams as Constance telling us and David Mackley that the ID on the John Doe, the headless John Doe aforementioned, has been blocked by the military. Which is a further clue, I think, at this point, if you were not already on the wagon, that this is probably Major Briggs. I mean, certainly at the time, after this aired, the internet was alive with theories like this is Major Briggs's body. And I think that's where my mind went as well. It was so exciting, this back in the day, man. I can't believe it's been 4 years already. It does feel like yesterday.
Piecing all this together, though, was just, oh.
Yeah, it was so much fun. It was just so much fun.
Week to week being like, nope, that was wrong. No, that was wrong. That was terrible.
Yeah,
wrong.
90% of everything was awfully wrong. But yeah, hey-ho.
And then we meet up with the gang again.
Cole and the gang. I'm here all week.
Nice. I love that. I was like, we're not anywhere near Mount Rushmore.
Hey, I brought a picture.
I love this because that is such a classic Albert thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I know this will either wind Gordon up or he will piss me off by being satisfied with it, and it was the latter.
Yeah.
Faces of stone.
There they are, Albert. Fucking nonsense.
The moment Albert loses the fucking rag with Gordon is one of my favourite moments in the entire show.
We're in South Dakota. Cossacks are in Russia.
Cossack!
Cossack!
Do you want us to pull over?
And it's just Crypta Bell just like doing the wave on, like just pure like not even-
Yeah, just waving the driver on. Yeah, it's perfect.
Up on the wrong side of bed this morning, Albert.
Oh, fantastic.
And Albert continues to be the best. My favourite is when they're like, oh, he was throwing up some kind of poison. And Albert's just like,
must have eaten locally. That is exactly a line that you would expect from classic Albert. So
Zing.
good. Must have eaten locally. It is interesting to note that this version of Albert is a bit more mellow than the classic Albert. Like you feel he's kind of mellowed a wee bit with age, but when he hits out with the barbs, they're good.
Yeah.
They are good.
cocaine, machine gun, and a dog leg.
What? No crackers and cheese?
Apologies in advance for Albert. I love that he says apologies in advance for Albert after Albert's been a dick.
Yeah, well, you know how time works in Twin Peaks. So Cole and the gang arrive at Yankton Prison, where the warden is one Warden Murphy. I just want to make a side note here. In Mark Frost, the final dossier, he makes it clear that Warden Murphy is involved in a shady business deal that also involves a prison that is built on the ground that was once the Ghostwood Estate, that was the disputed territory that both Ben Horne and Catherine Martell wanted in the original series.
Mm-hmm.
And I do wonder, was that ever mentioned in the script? And did Lynch just decide,
fuck it?
I don't think so. I kind of feel like it probably was.
Yep.
We don't have time for that stuff, Mark.
And this is one of the areas where, as much as, I think as far as classic Twin Peaks fans go, you get your classic Twin Peaks fans who are through and through Twin Peaks fans and not necessarily David Lynch fans. And then you get, the opposite. People who are hardcore David Lynch fans and who love Twin Peaks for that reason. I'm way more in the latter camp, as I know you are, James.
Mm-hmm.
Most often I do find myself when these discrepancies come up, I'm like, I'm kind of on Lynchy's side. I prefer the vagueness. But every now and again, there are areas where I'm like, I would have quite liked that reference being in there.
Yeah.
I feel that would have fleshed things out a bit more in a way that would actually been quite satisfying and quite interesting. And I do get the sense that David Lynch just decided that it was too much detail, not enough room for sweeping scenes. And You know,
shovels being spray painted gold.
Yeah, all the important
I
shit.
wonder how David Lynch thinks about, like, remember the Star Wars Extended Universe stuff, where they have, like, entire books devoted to, like, the Jawa on the right who did a thing.
Yeah.
Just that maybe drives him insane, or...
Well, I can answer that question for you by telling you that I will paraphrase / quote the Jasmine and Mel's on the Damn Fine TV podcast. They mentioned this a few episodes back that they both find it quite a bit upsetting that David Lynch seems to regard Mark Frost's books as non-canon and that he's not interested in them. For context of that, David Lynch has openly said that he's not read Mark Frost's books and he has no interest in reading them. And on the Damn Fine TV podcast, when Jasmine said that to Mel said, that makes me feel really bad for Mark Frost. And so I want to say to David Lynch, well, how about your weather reports? They're not canon. How about that, Mr. Lynch? Which is still one of the funniest things I've heard on a Twin Peaks podcast. But yeah, as far as the lore goes, David Lynch is very, very selective about what he allows in there. And even when he does allow lore in, he allows it in as I mean Mark Frost lore generally, because he's the big lore guy. Lynch allows no exposition about any of this stuff. He'll leave it in as something that you can interpret rather than something that's explained to you, which I imagine on some level has to drive Mark Frost mad, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know about you, Craig, or yourself, Alan, but have you ever considered, if you were in a position like that, if you were collaborating with someone on a project as grand as that, I feel like I would be more like the Mark Frost than the David Lynch in that partnership, because I always like to try and put wee bits of lore and stuff. And I would end up being the guy who the art guy would be like, fuck off, mate, we're gonna have sweeping for 10 minutes, stick your history up your arse. I'd be like, oh fuck. But from a viewer's point of view, I just fucking love the dream stuff.
Yeah, same. I mean, I definitely see it from both sides.
I was about to say that, like, when you were saying, I'm kind of, like, before you even mentioned that, I was starting to think along these lines, and I was thinking, Mark Frost is, like, the comic book fan who loves continuity. Well, how could Daredevil be in New York at that point, because this was happening and he was over there?
Right,
whereas David Lynch is like, it's fine, man, like, it'll all work out in the wash kind of thing, like, don't even trip, dog.
They're on Battle World, forget it.
As someone who has written long-form narrative fiction, I do sympathise with Mark Frost a great deal in this respect. That said, though, I also like being able... I mean, well, you've read my fiction, James, you know this.
You strike me as a mix.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do like things to be open to interpretation. I don't want this to turn it into talking about myself, but I'm just making the point that I do think there's definitely a middle ground. And it just is fascinating that we are so invested in this property that has been created by two men who seem to be on some level very, very diametrically opposed to how they approach the actual narrative of this thing they've created, which is just so fascinating.
I think part of it as well is, if you think about what TV or cinema in essence is, it's the combination of literature and visual art smushed together to make something. And I think between them, Mark Frost is very definitely the literature guy, whereas David Lynch is just a visual artist whose medium a lot of the time happens to be cinema. So he's like, I'm going to paint like this. Give me a frame to paint on, Mark, and I'll just paint over the lines.
I think it's quite telling whenever you read interviews with David Lynch, or you read anything about David Lynch, you know instantly he is someone who never stops creating, but most of what he creates has nothing to do with narrative. Most of what he does is painting or sculpting or building furniture. You know what I mean?
Yep.
He's always doing stuff, but he's not doing it. Narrative is not something he's thinking about consciously a lot of the time. But you can see how one of the things that has always fascinated me about David Lynch is that when you read interviews with him, and it's something I cottoned onto very early after I really got into Twin Peaks and started investigating his filmography, was that he approaches everything. He approaches films the same way he approaches a painting, in the sense that when he looks at a painting, he begins to wonder what the story might be behind that image, but knowing full well that there will never be a complete story because it is just a painting.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of understand why, from that perspective, the narratives that he creates are what some people would call incomplete. He would, I'm sure, would disagree with us, say they are complete, but they're complete in the sense that someone who values painting more than narrative thinks they're complete.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Read a few more books, David. What the fuck?
It's not all Kafka, Dave. Jesus.
Anyway, speaking of Cole and the gang, as we were, I like that. I'm stealing that. I'm going to edit out every instance of you saying it, and I'm just going to have me saying it there and make it sound like I came up with it. We get that outstanding interview scene.
Oh God, this scene.
Hello,
man.
Gordon, my old friend. What?
Where to even begin, right? I mean, this whole scene is so fucking good. So as I do with a lot of scenes, let's go back to how we were feeling when we first saw it. Because when I first saw this, I remember I was literally bouncing up and down in my seat because I was so nervous and so excited. And like, I can't believe we're actually getting Gordon, Cole and Albert face to face with the evil Cooper. This is incredible. I never thought I would see this. But the way this is staged, the choices that Lynch makes, like the weird distortion of Kyle MacLachlan's voice,
yeah,
where everything's kind of slowed down slightly.
Even just like the weird little screen that comes up between when they start talking.
It's very good to see you again, old friend.
Yeah, the backwards very was just like, oh, it's quite on
and that
the
was
nose,
one of those things.
but it's.
It is, right, and the first time, we definitely must have talked about this back in the day, but the first time I saw it, I was like, what did he say there? Because I know he said very, but it just sounded weird. And it wasn't until the second time I watched it, I was like, no, he said Eriv.
Right, I did not pick up on that
backwards.
at all. Like, did not get that at all.
Yeah, he's talking backwards. He's doing some lodge chat.
Mm.
And the story he starts weaving is... Like, how much
incredible.
of that is true or how much of that is...
I know, right? To this day, we still don't know exactly how much of that is true. Yeah, it's incredible. And I know I've been sucking Kyle MacLachlan's dick an awful lot in these last couple of episodes, but holy shit, man, he's so good here. Like, there's a real alien quality to the way he's just so kind of remote in the way he's telling this story, but using this dialogue that's kind of ingratiating. And the conflict of those two things is so unsettling. Also, we have to make mention of the thumb. When he gives the thumb up, which of course is the great iconography of the original series. It was one of those things that made you feel so wholesome between those two characters. And when this Cooper does it, it's like, oh no, I don't. I do not like this. I do not like this at all. And the smile that he does when he does it is, it's horrible. It's just so false and forced.
I've actually written down here, he does a Tony Blair smile.
Oh, holy shit, that is a great fucking analogy.
It's when it's the classic Tony Blair. It's there's no emotion in the eyes.
Yeah.
Yes. Holy shit, that is a great analogy. Doppel Blair.
I was working undercover to find weapons of mass destruction.
Education.
Cool Britannia.
But the way he repeats the whole thing word for word, that's the scariest part.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, it's like, does he not realise he's just said this already, word for word? And he's just decided that that's the way he's got... It's almost as if a long time ago he's decided this is the story he'll use.
He's rehearsed it so much that
he'll just repeat it. But on the other hand, going back to my head canon, it is like that time being slightly out of sync. Maybe he's saying it again because... he's a little bit out of sync with time and space, or the Cole and the gang are slightly out of time and space.
Yeah.
either way. You know, they're a bit out of sync with each other. No matter how you interpret it, it's creepy as fuck.
People feel unwell around him and stuff. Like,
yes, yeah.
He's such a force of evil that he's like is very present. This makes people sick.
I love the way also that Kyle MacLachlan just enunciates certain words in this scene. Like, I needed to be debriefed by you.
Yeah.
Something about the way he enunciates those words is fucking terrifying.
I'll be keeping my briefs on, thank you very much.
I was on my way to present it to you.
I will be exonerated
in courts of law. It was weirdly, and that the Return does this a lot, but it was weirdly one of those moments where it gave me something I really wanted that I did not know I wanted. Because I had so many possible conceptions of what it would be to see Gordon Cole and Albert come face to face with some version of Cooper 25 years later. And this was nothing like anything that I imagined. But what we got was just so on point and so 100% Lynchian, to use that old overused phrase.
The three faces when you go across as well of like Tammy, Albert and Gordon are all having like similar but distinctly different reactions. Like,
totally.
Tammy's face is just like pure what is this? Albert's face is
similar to mine.
Albert's is distraught. Like, and
yes, yeah, and what's powerful about that is that Albert, we've never seen Albert be that weak before. Like in the classic series, Albert was always very self-assured, and it's interesting we see that moment where he drops his gaze, which is something we never see Albert do, and it's like, oh, what the fuck is going on here? But I actually like Krista Bell's performance in this scene, because there is that WTF about it, but you can also see she's really kind of trying to parse the information in a way that Albert isn't, for example. And that's a real shock to us, because we're used to Albert being, pun intended, I guess, very forensic in everything, you know? Whereas Tammy's the one who's been forensic in this moment, it seems like.
She's got the stuff.
Larry Cohen's the stuff. But Gordon's reactions are really interesting because he is keeping Cooper on board, like he's keeping Cooper thinking that, oh yeah, I'm on board with this. But at the same time, and this is what I meant earlier when I say David Lynch has become a pretty good actor, you see that complexity in Lynch's face, where he's like, I'm going along with this, but I know it's not above board.
Which is probably why the next scene is so good, because you've just sat through that uncomfortable shit show, and it's like when Albert and Albert confesses about having given up the guy in Colombia, like, and then he dies. Fucking Gordon's whole world is collapsing here. It's just like, right, Coop's a maniac. You gave him information that led to somebody dying. What the fuck is going on here?
He's in cahoots with Philip Jeffries, who's been not on the scene for 30 years. Yeah.
I also really like, though, in the middle of like these two really, really brutal, tense scenes, there's a little moment where it's like, you're wearing a wire.
Because
you asked me to. Right. Go inside. We'll catch up with you later. Say fuck you, Gordon. What dick.
She sachets away and they just both perv on her.
Aye. Well, I feel better.
Hashtag dirty old man. One of the things I don't like about that is it sort of ruins my fan fiction that I've always had of Albert being gay. And I don't know why I always had that fanfic, but it just made sense to me that Albert was
I know
a gay
why you
man.
had it, because of him and Truman.
Yeah, I think that certainly fueled it. Yeah. I stand with Gandhi and King.
Albert might like boys and girls, you know, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he can be bi. That's fine. Yeah, that works.
Or indeed, men and women.
Preferably.
Yes.
And then of the scene where Albert confesses to Gordon, like you were saying, it's just it's powerhouse acting from Miguel Ferrer and David Lynch.
It's like folk talk about the scene in Heat between Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Like, I like that scene. I don't love that scene, but that was better. Maybe it's just because I like those characters better. I don't know, but
yeah, in terms of a head-to-head and two characters sussing each other out. What's interesting about this scene is these are two characters who've known each other for a long time, and who've trusted each other for a long time.
I think that's probably what makes it so much more powerful.
And you have that weight of Gordon's realization that Albert has not been fully truthful with him.
Yep.
And you can see that Gordon is both shocked and hurt by that. But then he has it's that moment I mentioned earlier where he repeats Albert's name 3 times. And then kind of moves on and says, okay, and it's almost that unspoken thing of, all right, you fucked up, but we're going to find a way to fix it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What is going on with the colour in this? The cinematography here.
Everything is blue.
Yeah, is it meant to be that it's like sort of late in the day, or is it just pure stylistic? It's all gone a bit blue rose.
Doesn't get any bluer.
I think a little from column A, a little from column B. I mean, yeah, definitely it's stylized. The daylight never looks like that unless you've not set your white balance properly. Fuck's sake, Lynch, set your white balance, mate. Peter Deming, come on, man. You're supposed to be an ASC.
I love when even Gordon Cole, who's basically a guy we assume is always on it, says to Albert, something's very wrong. I hate to admit this, but I don't understand this situation at all. And he's like, do you understand this situation? And
blue rose.
Yep. And it just says,
doesn't get any bluer.
Sorry. Yeah. And that's the end of the episode and nothing happens after that.
We missed an important detail though, because Cole says to Albert, we need one specific person to take a look at Cooper.
You know where she lives?
Oh boy, did we have some theories about this back in the day, James.
Yep. I thought it was going to be Audrey. I thought it was going to be Annie.
My first guess, I will proudly say my first guess was Diane. But I was also on the train that it could be Annie or it could be Audrey. I was on board for any of those, but my first guess was Diane.
We'd seen the cast list and we knew Heather Graham wasn't on it, but I thought that was a red herring.
Yes, yeah. A fish which I'm not particularly fond, to quote Agent Cooper.
I thought maybe there was one person that could be able to tell if it was him or not, and it was going to be Eddie Vedder. They were going to bring in Trent Reznor of the Nine Inch Nails to check out if it was maybe Kiefer Sutherland. I don't know. There was just everyone.
I wish they'd brought back Kiefer Sutherland. That'd be so good.
Man, because I'm pretty sure that Kiefer Sutherland could have played a down and out alcoholic quite easily.
Yeah, for Alan's benefit, that is a detail that Mark Frost gives us in his books, that Sam Stanley, post the Theresa Banks investigation, does become an alcoholic and gets a bit down basically, and never really recovers. It's not really explained why, but
he's seen some weird shit.
He kind of falls off.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen Kiefer Sutherland play that version of Sam Stanley.
No one uses his weird green box anymore. But yeah, we were left with many mysteries deepening at the end of part 4. The first time viewing this, I admit I had no idea where it was going. It was going in so many different directions than I had anticipated, and I was
remember,
like,
this is my second time viewing it, and I'm kind of the same. So
yeah, I think the other thing as well is that when we first watched this, in the first 2 episodes, we were introduced to all this stuff in Buckhorn with Matthew Lillard. And none of that is mentioned in these 2 episodes. And it's like, huh? So, yeah, it's really, really, really impossible really to guess where it was going to go from here. This did feel to me, and I know this is something we said a lot in our Tron, not the Hamiltron, the other one, conversations while it was airing, that we did start to notice very early on that this was seeming much more like a long-form Lynch movie than anything else. And so that the logic of...
The black logic.
The logic of things knitting together in a neat way was not necessarily something we should expect. And certainly that panned out.
Mm-hmm. I was always waiting on Max Perlich making a comeback.
Yeah, of all the great characters we get introduced to are only there for blink and you miss
Chip,
it.
you son of a bitch!
It's weird how memorable that performance is. That's mine chips.
I think that about wraps it up for this episode. I hope you're enjoying, not you guys that I'm talking to obviously, because I assume you're enjoying it.
No, I am having a miserable time.
Same.
I hope you're enjoying listening to this. I hope this is something that is piquing your interest. I hope you're watching along with us at home and digesting the series along with us.
I heartily recommend that people just watch Twin Peaks: The Return on a continuous loop. So, if you're doing that, your quid's in.
On an Alderson loop, if you will.
Ayo, that's a hip Mr. Robot reference. You Mr. Robot fans. We will talk about Mr. Robot again.
We'll get back to it. We're going to start season 2 stuff real soon. Don't worry.
Do you like Mr. Robot?
That's alright.
Yeah.
Never heard it.
But anyway, yeah, so we'll probably be back next episode, I assume, with more Twin Peaks The Return nonsense.
I imagine that is exactly what we will be doing.
In the meantime, if you like what you heard, please do feel free to go onto your podcast provider of choice, leave us a comment, leave us some likes. If you're listening to this on YouTube, do the same, give us that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, comment, all the calls to action that we have to do. We would really appreciate it. We're still a growing podcast, not just in numbers of people presenting it, no less. We really would appreciate it. This is not our job. This is something that we do on the side.
Yeah, because we're crazy and we just love talking endlessly and obsessively about stuff.
I thought that growing thing was a jibe at like my lockdown weight gain, but you know, I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt.
I can definitely confirm that I've done a lot of growing during lockdown, most of it physical.
So yeah, please do, if you like what you hear, tell a friend, tell someone else's friend, shout a stranger in the street.
Not too aggressively, and please do continue to socially distance. Alan, before we wrap up here, well, I was going to say tell us where else you're at, but I'm going to make the observation first of all that 2 consecutive episodes of fSobriety in the space of a month, that's more often than you've appeared on Big Glasgow Comics Podcast. But
this is true.
Tell the people listening about Big Glasgow Comic Podcast.
There is, as you say, the Big Glasgow comic page, which is like a good source for your comic book news, reviews, and all things in between. They also do quite a lot on like, video games, as the kids no doubt don't call them. Check it out, bigglasgowcomicpage.com. And the podcast is BGCP Disassembled. And I'm going to reiterate what James has just said. Like, please give it a listen, and if you like what you hear, subscribe, smash that bell, all that good stuff, share it, tell a friend.
You get anything else you want to summarise, Craig? Any plugs you want to do? Check out Craig's author page on theevilamazon.com.
You can do that, yeah. I apologise for the presence of Bezos, but what can we do? Oh, you object to capitalism, but you live under capitalism? Yes, because that's what capitalism is. It forces us to live under it. Link in the episode description if you fancy checking out things I have created via the written word.
As a reader, sorry, I'm just going to jump in here and interrupt, but as a reader...
Looks like we got ourselves a reader.
As a reader of Craig's fiction, I would say, if you're a fan of Twin Peaks The Return, it's highly likely you will enjoy Craig's work.
Oh, look at that. Hey, recommendations don't come hotter than that. I sounded really sarcastic. I meant it sincerely.
Yeah.
I have one of those voices, I'm sorry.
Thanks very much. Listen to this prick fucking tell people all my stuff's good. Well, la-di-da.
Alright, folks, I think that wraps it up. Thank you for listening, and we do hope you stick with us. In the meantime, that is it for now. Please do take care.
Yep. Thanks once again to Alan for
joining us.
Yeah,
Alan, thanks for your company. We do enjoy having you along. I'm sure we'll have you along again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, if not next episode, then certainly we'll try and make this a regular thing, I guess, since we seem to be digging it. Alright, cool. Well, I think that does us, unless anyone has anything else to add.
I'm just curious as to the volume of liquid remaining in your wine bottle, Craig.
Well, it's funny you asked that, James, because I'm just looking at it here right now, this very second, and as you can hear, I have reached round about half the bottle. Toodle pip.
fSobriety, Episode 20, The Gang, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates, by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. This episode's guest host once again was Alan Todd, from the Big Glasgow comic page and related podcast. Check out the links in the description, to show them some love. Speaking of love, wow, 20 episodes. That's kind of amazing. Thank you to everyone who listens and supports our work, but especially you, Argentina. You know how we do. Come say hello on our social media, at facebook.com/fSobriety podcast, on Twitter at fSobrietycast, and search YouTube for fSobriety podcast. I hate to admit this, but I don't understand this situation at all. Do you understand the situation? Blue Rose. It doesn't get any bluer.
Shoes get mentioned a lot in the original shoe. The original shoe.
Thinking about that while I was watching this, I feel like Doggy is just his pure intuition. And I'll say that again, but say the actual word properly this time.
Sorry, I totally derailed that by just having to ask that question. Could have totally IMDb'd it or whatever.
Welcome
yes,
to fSobriety.
True.